Here we go.
Okay, good morning. In light of the continuing state of emergency declared by Governor
Please,
Northam.
we're not streaming yet.
Okay.
Okay, I'll let you know as soon as we are.
Thank you.
We are now live.
Good morning. In light of the continuing state of emergency declared by Governor Northam, where it is impractical or unsafe to assemble a quorum in a single location, I move we adopt this agenda to take action to discuss or transact the business statutorily required or necessary to continue the operation of the Commonwealth Transportation Board.
Second.
So will everybody please indicate your presence and your agreement with the roll call. Thank you, Carol.
Mr. Brown. Mr. Dodson.
Yes and yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes and present.
Mr. Kasperlitz.
Yes.
Mr. Malden.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Dr. Smoot.
Yes.
Mr. Stinson.
Yes.
Mr. Williams. Mr. Yates.
Yes.
The roll is complete. The motion's passed.
Thank you, Carol. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. So anyway, I'm hoping that today can be very efficient and not be quite as long as some of our most immediate past CTB meetings, but we shall see. And with that, we're going to open on a presentation on an EV, an electric vehicle readiness study that we actually undertook this year. It is a follow-up to this 2019 sustainability study that we conducted that actually resulted in the 2020 Omnibus transportation package. There were a few pieces, but this being the most prominent one that we were not able to complete all in 2019. And so Kathy McGee, who's Director of Innovation and Research for Transportation across the entire Secretariat, and Roni Day, who is Deputy Director of our OIPI office, actually led the study with Michael Baker International. And so today we have Brad Shelton presenting. And before I turn that over to Brad, Kathy, Ronique, is there anything you would like to add?
So we're here to answer any questions for sure, but I would just say that the intent of this study was to look at our transportation infrastructure and determine what opportunities exist to better support increasing numbers of EVs within that infrastructure. So we did keep our focus on things we could control as opposed to the much larger picture that is also being looked at across multiple agencies within the Commonwealth. So as we go through the presentation, you'll see where we did limit that focus, but also identified touch points with other activities.
Correct, and with the private sector as well. And there were a number of stakeholders involved with this particular study, just as it was with the sustainability report. And Mr. Malden, I remember that you had mentioned, the importance of being prepared for the penetration of electric vehicles coming our way. And so this was an attempt with a fundamental approach, just looking at where we are and what we need to do to be prepared. And so with that, Mr. Shelton, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, and good morning. What a better day to talk about green infrastructure than on St. Patrick's Day, right? Thank you again. My name is Brad Shelton with Michael Baker, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you all this morning about the Virginia Transportation Electric Vehicle Readiness Study that we developed with our teammate SIR for the Virginia Office of Transportation Research and Innovation. Next slide. So as Kathy mentioned, really the goal of this study was to identify ways that we can improve electric vehicle readiness here in Virginia from a transportation perspective with a strong focus on transportation infrastructure. What are things that we can do within the purview of the Transportation Secretariat? Also as noted, this does build on the work that was completed for the 2019 Transportation Funding Sustainability Study that included projections that 12% of new car sales would be electric by 2030. So the electric vehicles are coming, so how can we best be ready for them? To develop this study, we convened and leveraged input from a stakeholder group made up of agency and industry representatives with an interest in vehicle electrification. We also wanted to make sure we had a good understanding of Virginia's current level of EV readiness. So we not only looked at data and research, but our teammate SIR actually conducted surveys of over 450 Virginians who either currently own an electric vehicle or who would consider purchasing an EV as their next vehicle to understand their perceptions of our readiness and potential barriers to vehicle adoption. And then we ultimately conducted a review of state practices to identify best practices for application here in Virginia. Next slide, please. So I want to start this morning with a kind of high-level overview of Charging Infrastructure 101. So when we talk about electric vehicle charging infrastructure, there's three levels of charging. Level 1 charging is your typical, which is standard 120-volt outlet at your house. If you were to plug your vehicle into a level 1 charger, you're looking at probably over a day to get your vehicle to full charge. And this is often referred to as trickle charging. Now, level 2 charging is what's referred to as destination charging. Most electric vehicle owners will have a level 2 charger installed at their home. You'll also find these at parking decks, office complexes, hotels, anywhere where somebody might leave a vehicle for several hours during a day or even overnight. Takes about a half a day to get a vehicle to full charge on level 2. And when we talk about level 2, there's two different plugs available. Tesla has their proprietary destination charger, but most of your public chargers are going to use that J1772 standard. The third level of charging is the DC fast charging. Now, this is the equivalent of the electric gas station. So if you're on a road trip somewhere and you need to top off to get to your destination, you're going to seek out a DC fast charger. A vehicle can be brought to full charge in about an hour on DC fast, depending on the battery capacity of the vehicle. We have 3 plug types. While we have vehicles on the road today that use CHAdeMO, there are no vehicles planned for North America in the future that will use that CHAdeMO standard. The CCS standard seems to be the standard that everybody is migrating towards. So when we think about where we want to invest in infrastructure, it's important to understand the difference in those plug types and what's going to be used in the future, which really seems to be that CCS standard. Next slide. In Virginia, at the time that we developed the study, which I believe we pulled the data back in December, we had 701 public charging stations and 2,095 charging outlets, so the actual plugs you can plug into your vehicle. That number has actually increased since then, I believe. We ranked 13th in the U.S. for the total number of EV registrations and 11th in the U.S. for the number of EV charging stations. Next slide, please. As part of our study, we did perform a gap analysis of our DC fast chargers along the interstate highway network. We used the standards set forth by FHWA's Alternative Fuels Corridors program, which recommends having chargers within 50 miles of each other to be considered having coverage on a corridor. So what you see on the map here, anywhere that you see red is where we have more than 50 miles between our CCS stations on the interstate highway network. So you'll see we currently have gaps on I-85 and in the western part of the state. And then if we look at the other DC fast charging standard, next slide, please. The CHAdeMO plugs, we see a very similar pattern. We have gaps again on I-85 and in very similar locations on the western part of the state. So we're going to talk more about the alternative fuels corridor in a few slides. Next slide, please. In order to identify ways to improve our readiness, it was also important to understand what some of the perceived barriers are to electric vehicle adoption. And in 2012, when electric vehicles were first becoming widely available, the Federal Highway Administration conducted a survey, and 2 of the top 3 perceived barriers were infrastructure related. Range anxiety, the fear of running out of charge before you can get to a station, and the availability of charging infrastructure. Well, if you look at the graph to the right, the blue line represents the number of charging stations in the U.S. We went from about 8,000 charging stations to 27,000 charging stations, and that green line is the actual number of plugs available, so that increased even at a higher rate. But despite that investment, in 2019, another survey was issued, and 3 of the top 4 perceived barriers are still infrastructure related. We see range anxiety is still there, availability of charging infrastructure, and speed of charging. So we still have some work to do in this country to get the charging infrastructure up to a level where folks feel that it is adequate to support electric vehicles. Next slide, please. So based on this data and the research that we conducted of other states' best practices, we came up with 10 opportunities for improving transportation EV readiness here in Virginia. Next slide. The first is for the Office of Transportation Innovation to coordinate with the Secretary of Natural Resources to convene an interagency working group in collaboration with the Governor's Conservation Cabinet. We saw a number of interagency working groups being used to great benefit at a number of other states when we performed our research. And the idea here is that the agencies within the Transportation Secretariat, Vdot, Department of Rail and Public Transportation, would continue to build on their existing relationships with the Department of Environmental Quality, Department of Mines, Mineral and Energy. But let's also bring in agencies such as Department of General Services, who oversees state facilities and vehicle fleets, and also the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, who may be able to identify potential private sector partners for improving Virginia's EV readiness. So the whole idea would be to link our various statewide efforts into a unified approach, be able to leverage resources from multiple agencies and maximize the Commonwealth's readiness. Next slide, please. As I noted, our report was delivered in January prior to our most recent legislative session. So one of the opportunities that we identified was evaluating low and zero emission vehicle regulations. Well, as most of you are probably aware, House Bill 1965 did just that. So Virginia is poised to become the next low emission, zero emission vehicle state, otherwise referred to as a LEV or ZEV state. And essentially what this means is that under the Clean Air Act, states are permitted to adopt California's LEV and ZEV standards. So it sets targets for vehicle manufacturers to sell a certain percentage of low emission and zero emission vehicles within these states. 2 main benefits to this program. Obviously, there are the environmental benefits associated with electric vehicles. But the other thing, that's kind of the secondary benefit, is that a number of manufacturers only allocate electric vehicles for sale in these states. So for example, if you wanted to purchase a Hyundai Kona electric or a Kia Niro electric, those vehicles are not currently offered for sale in Virginia. You would have to travel to a ZEV state to purchase those. So there's some economic impact to this as well when we talk about expanding the vehicle marketplace. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, I wanted to circle back on the alternative fuels corridors, but we certainly want to expand our existing program of alternative fuels corridors to close gaps in Virginia's charging network. The Federal Highway Administration has the Alternative Fuels Corridors program, which allows states to identify corridors as EV corridor ready if they have CCS and CHAdeMO DC fast charging stations located within 50 miles of each other on the noted corridor. Virginia nominated a number of corridors back in 2016 when the program was first made available, and that's the map that you see on this slide here. The corridors identified in green. It's been about 5 years, so there's been some additional investment in EV infrastructure on these corridors, so we think it's time to perform another review of these corridors to identify where we have closed some of those gaps and where gaps remain to help us identify areas where we might want to target future investments in infrastructure. Next slide, please. Continuing on that theme of identifying where to target investment, One of the agencies that we worked with in the development of this study is Virginia Clean Cities, who's based out of Harrisonburg. And Virginia Clean Cities maintains a database of all the charging stations, public and private, in the Commonwealth. And they also coordinate nationally with the Alternative Fuels Data Center. So developing partnerships with these agencies and being able to leverage their information on where charging stations are and where they're anticipated, combined with the data available within the Transportation Secretariat, would allow us to perform gap analyses beyond just a geographic level. We could start looking at traffic volumes, origin destination data pairs to figure out where vehicles are coming to and going from, the mix of the vehicle fleet, whether it's light duty vehicles, medium or heavy duty. So this would allow us to better target where we might need investments based on how the roadways are being used. Once we've had the capability to identify where we need investments, then the next step would be to identify potential private sector partners to help us fill those gaps. Next slide, please. Another opportunity we identified was exploring a pilot program for charging at Commonwealth facilities. When we looked at, if we just look at the Transportation Secretariat, the Commonwealth owns a number of properties when you consider park and ride lots or even Vdot offices, and many of these are often in underserved areas or rural areas where it may be challenging to have private investment occur on its own. By identifying locations that would be appropriate for charging at these facilities, there might be an opportunity to partner with a private sector partner to come in and install the chargers and operate the chargers. We would also want to make sure that we're evaluating any grant opportunities as they become available for installation of chargers at these locations. But again, it's another tool that will allow us to help close some of these gaps in some of these underserved and hard to reach areas. Next slide, please. The next item is to evaluate the feasibility to deploy fleet EVs. The state operates a large vehicle fleet of conventionally powered vehicles. So the idea here would be to coordinate with the Department of General Services and other state agencies, first to identify appropriate uses for electric vehicles within state fleets. And really the next step would be to perform essentially a cost-benefit analysis. We certainly recognize that there's high upfront cost to electric vehicles when you consider the cost of the charging infrastructure and the higher costs. However, electric vehicles have a lower fueling, and they also have lower maintenance costs since they have fewer moving parts in the vehicles. So if we think about the lifetime of the vehicles and the expenses to the fleet over time, there could be a benefit there. Something else that we saw is some other states are employing central procurement that others, such as local governments within the state, can use to deploy fleet vehicles at the local level. So that is another opportunity. Next slide, please. Our research showed that electric can really aid in removing perceived barriers, whether that's barriers associated with the charging infrastructure that's available, how often a vehicle needs to be charged, what are the limitations. So creating a clearinghouse for information and education can help remove those barriers. So we would want to see information provided, benefits and challenges of EVs, and not simply the passenger fleet, because quite frankly, there's a lot of information available on passenger electric vehicles. But where there's also a need is information on battery electric buses, battery electric vans, so that our transit operators can identify whether electrification is a good option. And furthermore, information on medium duty and heavy duty electric vehicles, so that our fleet operators throughout the state can also evaluate electrification. Other information that we've seen shared across, shared on other states' websites is information on electric vehicle registration and the location of charging infrastructure. And we performed that analysis just very quickly, and that's the map that you see here. And the darker colors indicate where we have a higher level of electric vehicles in those localities. And as you can see, the dots represent the charging stations. There is a strong correlation between investment in charging infrastructure and where we have higher adoption rates, higher vehicle adoption rates, I'm sorry. So being able to make this information public could help drive private investment in infrastructure. Next slide, please. We also looked at the services provided by Vdot Safety Service Patrol, and the Safety Service Patrol currently provides gas to vehicles who run out of fuel. However, we don't have a similar service available for electric vehicles that run out of charge. So the first step would be to evaluate whether or not there's a need for roadside charging to be provided by the Safety Service Patrol. So we would want to monitor electric vehicle out of charge incidents, and especially keep an eye on that as traffic levels return to pre-pandemic levels, and as we see more electric vehicles integrated into the fleet, as we see more electric vehicles available for sale, and higher adoption rates. So we would want to identify if there is a need. The next step would be then to identify can the electric vehicle roadside charging be conducted quickly and safely. So it would need to be conducted quicker than a tow to be feasible, to make sure that we are facilitating quick clearance. And we would also want to monitor vendors of mobile charging units, because there is additional research and investment being made into these units. They're becoming smaller and faster. So if it's not a good fit today, there might be a good fit 6 months, 12 months, 2 years from now. So it's just something that we want to keep an eye on moving forward. Next slide. Shows that there is a disproportionately high exposure to exhaust emissions in communities of color and underserved communities, and electric vehicles can be a good tool in limiting the exposure of exhaust emissions in these communities. So opportunities here include supporting electric vehicle bus deployment in these neighborhoods, electric vehicle school bus conversion or deployment, and also facilitation of electric vehicle fleet usage when we think about delivery or service vehicles that are operating in these communities. So there's an opportunity there to coordinate with the private sector. And something else that we would encourage is supporting the placement of public chargers in disadvantaged communities. The obvious is that electric vehicles are not inexpensive. However, we are seeing more electric vehicles on the used market that will become more attainable for members of the population of lower income. But if there's no charging facility in place, then there's not even going to be an option to these communities. Next slide, please. And the final opportunity that we identified is really to continue the great work that we've been doing here in Virginia for bus electrification. We really are a leader in bus electrification here. And in FY20, we had 17 electric buses funded in 3 locations across the Commonwealth. So we want to continue to support our investments in battery electric transit, whether that's, but we're also seeing battery electric vans hit the, which could better serve some of our rural localities. So the next steps identify where we may want to consider the addition of bus charging away from the bus depot that may be able to extend the range of these vehicles, identification of routes that are well vehicle deployment, and ultimately we want to make vehicles aren't solely deployed to serve choice, make sure that we are being inclusive of our transit dependent and our rural communities as well. Next slide, please. So those are the 10 opportunities that we identified, and we feel that these will really set Virginia up well for opportunities, whether they are grant opportunities and would allow us to have access to data and resources to quick grant opportunities, or to coordinate with the private sector on how we can engage them for helping us to meet our electric vehicle readiness goals. And also to continue the good work that we've been doing here in the Commonwealth with electrification, and especially in the arena of transit. We really are a leader in those regards. So with that, I really do appreciate your time, and I will entertain any questions you may have.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you for the overview. And again, thank you to Kathy McGee and Roni Day for spearheading this. I will let the board know that I have already had some initial discussions with Matt Strickler, Secretary of Natural Resources, and Grinley Johnson, who is now our Secretary of Administration, to which DGS reports. Joe D'Amico actually gave a brief overview of how our fleets are procured in Virginia, which is a quite significant process, I will say. But Matt Strickler did agree that the Governor's Conservation Cabinet would be a great clearinghouse for our work. I think we were all surprised the amount of work being done without a tremendous amount of coordination. So how can we share the data and the information we're collecting, and how do we leverage that here in the Commonwealth? So did want to let you know that those discussions have been initiated. With that, I will open up thoughts, questions from the board.
Madam Secretary, this is
Mr. Malbin.
I'm curious, Brad. Do you know what the cost per charge would be as compared to what the alternative is with fossil fuel?
So with Mr. Marvin, so when we talk about cost per charge, so it really depends on the charging provider, because there are if you're in a network, sometimes that's done by subscription, so it can vary. But I believe the average, and I'll ask Jeff Kupko, who's also on the call, to keep me honest. But I believe the average cost per vehicle is 8 cents a mile versus conventionally fueled, which is around 14 cents a mile. So there is a slight difference there.
Thank you.
And
And
I would agree with Brad on that response. It's generally around half as much on the recharging compared to refueling.
Thank you, Jeff.
my second question, maybe this is for you, Madam Secretary, but where is the conversation going in terms of vehicle miles traveled, in terms of our revenue? As these vehicles are deployed, obviously it's going to impact our gasoline tax revenue. Is there a discussion how to keep that neutral? Or
Well, you know, when we did the sustainability study, the purpose of it was really to look at the impact of fuel efficiency and electrification on transportation revenues. So that was really the intention in 2019. What we found was that the momentum for fuel efficiency was even faster than what had been predicted. And that is how we discovered that we were going to be below $500 million on gas tax collections. And that's what prompted us to look at creating the Omnibus transportation bill. So in that bill, you know, we did raise the gas tax because we're looking to build a bridge to whatever the future looks like. We did index it to a source that was growing, CPI. We created the highway use fee, which is based on the fuel efficiency of vehicles. So at registration, we are beginning to collect fees on fuel efficient and electric vehicles now. And DMV is creating a mileage-based user program, a voluntary program. They're in 1 year into it. They have 2 years to implement it, to bring it to fruition. So we are putting pieces together. Again, it's early. The EV penetration has been, and Brad and Jeff, you make sure I'm being honest, it has been slower than what had been initially predicted. It is growing. I believe, you know, we ranked 12th, 13th in the country, but it has been a slower penetration. So transportation's in a very unique position. We certainly applaud the fuel efficiency and electrification of our system for many reasons, including very environmental. At the same time, we're trying to balance what the implications are in revenue. So, John, I would say that we are working through that. We put some important pieces in place, but I think it's an ongoing process to determine, you know, are we at the right balance? Do we need to shift what that highway use fee is, which is now 80% of, it's 80% based on fuel efficiency of vehicles of what an average motor fuels vehicle would be charged. And we actually arrived at the 80% working with our Secretary of Natural Resources. So it's a process that we're very well aware of. I would say that Virginia is certainly a leader in this. We're one of 3 states right now, of which I'm aware of, that we are actually implementing and taking these steps. And we are also a member of the, it used to be the I-95 coalition. It's 21 states. It's the TCI, TEC, Transportation East Coast. Anyway, it's all the states on the East Coast. And so we are working to collaborate with them on this issue as well. And then I believe, with the Biden administration coming in, there may be more federal coordination on this issue. That was a really long-winded answer, but it's a process.
Yeah, but it was a good answer.
Thank you. I'm done. Signing off now.
Madam
Secretary.
Ms. Hines.
Thanks. Just a quick question. When I look at that list of 10 opportunities that came out in this PowerPoint, the question I have is, are there any places where we know already we should make a policy shift, the CTB? So the one that popped into my mind is, of course, we have welcome stations on all of our corridors. And I know we can't have vendors vending there. Are we putting charging stations there? And if not, is it our policy that's the barrier, or is it something else?
Would you like me to address that?
Yes.
So it's not a state policy, it's a federal regulation that keeps us from being able to charge for electricity at EV charging infrastructure in rest areas on interstates. There is some indication that might be changing. So we remain ready for that change when it does occur. But as of today, we're unable to sell electricity through a charging station at a rest area. But there was a bill that went through this year that requires installation of charging infrastructure for new state buildings and local government buildings with size limitations and major renovations. So that certainly could increase the number of charging stations that we have across the Commonwealth over time, obviously.
Mr. Miller, was that you?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm curious about the different plug types and sort of the proprietary Tesla versus everybody else. Is that the Betamax of video recording or video stuff, or what is that? How's that going to go forward? And how do we balance that? And I guess we're too early in the process, but what are other states that are ahead of us? What are they doing with regard to trying to provide, Tesla's proprietary charging opportunities versus everyone else? At the end of the day, Tesla took the lead, but I don't think they're going to dominate the market. There's a lot of folks in the market that are pretty capable. So how are other states working through that sort of issue?
Brad, do you want to take that?
Absolutely. Yeah, Mr. Miller. So what we're seeing, and that's a good analogy, the VHS and Betamax. So what we're seeing with the level 3 chargers is that, as I mentioned, we currently have vehicles on the roads that use the CHAdeMO. So the CHAdeMO can't go away while we still have those vehicles operating. But moving forward into the future, it looks like CCS is going to be the VHS of chargers for all vehicles that are non-Tesla. When you talk about Tesla, Tesla built their network themselves. So our stance on that from what Virginia's role should be is we're going to continue to let Tesla be Tesla and do what Tesla does. But as far as where public investment needs to occur or encouragement, that needs to be focused on the plugs that are available publicly, which would essentially be the CCS standard. One thing to keep in mind, though, that's a little interesting is when we talk about the alternative fuels corridors and having that EV signage ready designation, the current FHWA guidance requires you to have both CCS and CHAdeMO plugs available to meet that corridor designation. So even though we're not seeing 80 new vehicles coming out in the future using CHAdeMO to meet that FHWA guidance, we still have to have CHAdeMO plugs available. So little bit of a wrinkle there, but as far as Tesla goes, Tesla's in charge of their own network. They're essentially doing their own thing, and the states are focusing on the public charging side of things, which would be the CCS or CHAdeMO.
So
And if I could build on that too a little bit, Brad, and I think, you know, to that point, yeah, certainly Tesla did it on its own, and there's some indication maybe some other automakers may try to do their own network. But what we've seen a lot of as of late is more partnerships with those network companies that are out there. Like, for instance, Ford, which obviously has just introduced the Mach-E as a promising EV, has partnered with Electrify America with the Ford Pass. So basically, you just plug in your Ford at there. You don't even need to use your app or anything like that. So I think we may also see some leveraged partnerships from charging network providers in addition to the private led deployments.
Yes.
Madam Secretary, this is Carlos.
Hi, Mr. Brown. How are you?
Good morning.
Good morning.
You know, we're talking a lot about the infrastructure that we as the state could facilitate or develop. Happening to be a EV owner, one of the things that I've realized is that the model really is for these vehicles to be charged at home, right? At home, overnight, during low peak hours, and that has a whole bunch of grid reliability implications, as well as if you really want the emissions controls, you want to use power when it's cheapest and when there's excess there. And so one of the questions I had is, are we thinking about anything from a policy perspective, although it may be adverse to our transportation fund's interest, to facilitate tax policy, to facilitate the adoption of EV charging systems at home? For example, tax incentives generally to install an EV charger, depending on where your panel box is and in your home, is going to run somewhere between $300 on the low end to as much as $1,500 or so to install the charger, depending on which type of charger. And so we've done some research on this, and my day job, and we found that that's one of the other big barriers, right? So if someone can justify and rationalize the adoption, purchasing the vehicle, right now they have to have that immediate liquidity in addition to buying the vehicle, to pay an electrician somewhere, let's say an average of $800 to install this infrastructure, which becomes a barrier to entry. And so if we're really going to get the real benefits and get widespread adoption of EVs, we're going to have to figure out how to facilitate people getting over that hurdle. And I just was curious as to whether there's any discussion around that, because I'll share this last point, and I'll be quiet, is our corridors are great, right? The 95, 64, 80, but there's a lot of space in between that area. On one of my first trips with my EV to Hampton Roads, and I have the Model X, which is the long range, you can't go to Portsmouth and back to Richmond on the interstate in one turnaround trip without charging someplace. And I went to Portsmouth, and there were no chargers anywhere in downtown Portsmouth. There was one in a theater somewhere in the downtown mall. There were several in downtown Norfolk, some in Virginia Beach, but there are huge areas where if you are low and you're not playing well, you're going to be knocking on someone's back door trying to see if you can plug the car in. So just a couple comments and a question about whether we've thought about any policy issues around tax.
So Brad, Jeff?
So sure, Mr. Brown. So to discuss, I guess, the issue about installation of infrastructure at the local level. So first off, you're right. The home charging is a key component of making all this work. And when we talk about EV education and misconceptions, that's one of the biggest ones. Is a lot of people who might not know a lot about EVs don't take into account that, oh, I can charge my vehicle at home. I don't have to spend all this time at gas stations like I did in the past. And the Federal Highway Administration actually did a study, and they had an estimate that said that if we wanted to install electric vehicle chargers to be the equivalent of gas stations in number and coverage, it would cost over $11 million of investment by 2030. However, because of home charging, we don't feel that there's a need to have that level of investment. But you are correct in that it's not cheap to have a home charger installed. There is an outlay, and we didn't really get into any discussion of taxation as far as air study goes. But I do want to point out that the legislation did recently pass Senate Bill 1223, which is to perform an analysis of EV infrastructure, both existing and future, that will be needed to support the 2045 net zero carbon target as part of the update to the Virginia Energy Plan. So that effort's being led by DEQ, if I believe. I think there might be a need to follow up there, and that's where our recommendation for an interagency working group would really come into play, so that we can make sure that we're keeping tabs on everything that's going on in that arena.
Yeah,
and I'll build a little too, and just saying. Go ahead.
Ellis, I just wanted to follow up and just say that, you know, there are many different working groups taking place, and some of them are looking at tax issues regarding the purchase, utility use. I mean, just all of these issues. And I think one of the lessons from going through this process is how much we need to coordinate.
Yeah.
So anyway, I thought your question was really good. I'm sorry, Jeff.
No worries. That was a valid point. And the other aspect too is, you know, some people may not have the ability to charge at home, depending on what is home. Certainly, multi-unit dwellings sometimes do present other challenges as well. So, you know, looking at a trip as, you know, two sides of a coin, could you charge at home or could you charge at work? And so that's also some of the other aspects that where there may be opportunities to provide charging in workplaces as well, so that somebody has that access and can make a decision on whether or not to make the purchase.
Jeff, John Malvin here. I have one additional question. Is it possible that if you pulled up to a charging station that there could be 3 plugs there? Just like a gas pump, you got regular, mid-grade, and premium, and you just select the plug that's for your automobile. Seems like that would be more efficient and less duplication of network.
You're absolutely onto something there, because right now, especially with like your fast charging, you do pull up, and most of them have 2. They have the CCS and the CHAdeMO, and there has been a partnership. I do think it is with Electrify America, where they have begun to start also offering the Tesla plug as well. So exactly to your point, that you could show up at a station and it has all 3 options for you. You know, long term, I think that might whittle down to 2, but at least in the near term, that is a possibility. So we either have singular stations with multiple plugs, or we have multiple stations with singular plugs.
Just one other point. You can Tesla at least offers adapters. So if you happen to be plugging in, you know, at some other charging installation, you can have a suite of adapters that will allow you to plug your Tesla in. And in the worst case scenario, you can plug it into the, you know, just a regular 120 outlet. It's a slow charge, but I've actually reverted to that from time to time on beach week, just to be able to, you know.
Oh, in the old days, right? The old days for beach week.
Well,
I will say, well, I just only mean this year, I guess. So I would just say to the board, what has been, you know, so important for us is that regardless of what the future holds, and technology in this arena is evolving very quickly, that Virginia is prepared. And that's what we're really trying to put in motion. is being prepared for what that future looks like and being able to be agile and responsive to what takes place in the marketplace. So that has been a lot of the reasoning going into this. We do plan on coordinating and bringing back updates to the board. But anyway, I think Brad and Jeff, this was a very good foundation for us. I think there are very elementary steps that we can take. I do really appreciate the efforts of the Natural Resources Secretariat in, how they have been supporting the rest of the cabinet and other infrastructure through the Volkswagen settlement funds to not just, DRPT as far as electric buses, but also their work in electrifying vehicles at the Port of Virginia. So there's been, I believe we have created a solid path. And again, it's going to be a process. So gentlemen, thank you. I'm sorry.
Secretary Steve Johnson.
Oh, hey, Mr. Johnson.
Good morning. Just
morning.
Greatly appreciate the presentation and looking at the interagency working group. I was curious in looking at the presentation as well. You've got Pennsylvania and Colorado, and I think one other state that have logos and taglines developed. And I was curious if that's something that our group is looking at overall.
I will take that. At this point, we have not. I think that the group is just coming together, and it's really the recommendation coming out of this study that I presented it to Matt Strickler and Grinley Johnson. So we are just kind of launching that, but that is something that I can bring to the attention of the Conservation Cabinet.
Thank you very much.
Anybody else? And again, thank you, Kathy McGee, Ronique Day, Brad and Jeff, thank you for being with us this morning. And happy St. Patrick's Day to you as someone who was born Shannon Coggins. I was going to save it for the end, but yes, happy Valentine's Day. And sadly, my day is really, really long today. I'd like to find time to celebrate, but anyway, hope there's something green in my future. Anyway, thank you. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Julie Whitlock and Michael Westerman from the Attorney General's office. In one of our prior meetings, very recently, it came up, and it was really following Mr. Brown's presentation on the Central Virginia Transportation Authority, that new authority being introduced and the work that's being done. And it was really through that some of us, and I remember very distinctly Allison DeTonk, just requesting to understand what are the differences among these authorities. We now have three with the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, the Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission, HR TAC, and now Central Virginia. What are the differences with those three particular authorities? And I know there's been interest in looking beyond that to the other commissions and authorities that operate around Virginia, but I really see this as somewhat of a foundational presentation. And so with that, Julie Whitlock, I will turn it over to you.
All right, well, thank you. If we could go to the next slide. So I'm Julie Whitlock. I'm Chief of the Transportation Section at the Office of the Attorney General. And today we've got Michael Westerman will be doing the bulk of the presentation. Michael is one of our senior assistant attorney generals who works frequently with the board and with the regional authorities, and works primarily on the large P3 contracts that often involve the regional authorities. We also have one of our newest hires, Daniel Bidwell, contributed to our presentation today. Daniel is also working on the P3 and the tolling contracts as well. So next slide. So we just wanted to kind of remind you that authorities have been around for a really long time. The first one, the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, was actually put together in 1966. We have a real gap from 1966 until the 2000s when things really started to pick up. And since 2000, you can see that we've had several authorities created, most recently, as the Secretary mentioned, the Central Virginia Transportation Authority. Next slide. And so today we're going to focus on the three big authorities: the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, the Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission, HRTAC, and the newly created Central Virginia Transportation Authority. And also, we are going to focus today on the makeup of these authorities, and we're going to prepare a presentation for next month that will be focused more on the financing for these authorities. So next slide. Some of the common attributes between these authorities is, of course, their regional focus. They deal with regional revenue. Some of them have tolling authority, though that authority differs, as Michael will tell you, among the authorities. And they all have the ability to issue debt. They all have an overlap in their membership with the CTB. They all have at least one CTB member appointed to the regional authorities, as well as the Commissioner of Highways and the Director of DRP or their designees. And all of the authorities can employ a CEO and staff. So with that general overview of some of their common attributes, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Westerman to get into some of the specifics of each of the three that we're looking at today. Michael?
All right, thank you, Julie. Good morning, Secretary Valentine and members of the board. I'll start out before we go to the next slide by saying common attributes among these three authorities. They're all created by statute. In some instances, you have authorities that you have an enabling act, but then it takes a second act by the localities to sort of pool and establish an authority. In this case, that's not true. For these three authorities, both the geographical bounds of the authorities, the composition of the authorities, and the authorities themselves are established by their own independent acts within the Code of Virginia. So that in and of itself makes them a little bit unique right out of the gate. Okay, can we go to the next slide, please? All right, so starting with the earliest authority among these three, Mvta. I'm not going to read you the whole slide, but you can see here for yourselves the composition of Mvta. It's counties and cities, essentially, in Planning District 8. There are 17 members. You have members from the local counties and cities, members from House of Delegates, Senate, one citizen member, non-legislative, and then there's one CTB member appointed by the governor. There are 3 non-voting members, 2 of which are the Commissioner of Highways and the Director of DRPT. So you can see right out of the gate that you have 3 overlapping members between the Mvta and the CTB. Next slide, please. All right, so as Ms. Whitlock mentioned, we're going to give a very high-level overview of the revenue sources. There will be a deeper dive in a presentation to follow on both sources of revenue among these authorities and also selection criteria, because each of these authorities manages a fund, at least one fund, and controls the fund and selects projects from that are funded by the fund. So where do the Mvta funds come from? The biggest pool is from a regional sales tax that's applied in the Northern Virginia counties and cities. There are a few other sources of funds that go into the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority Fund. There's a $20 million per year contribution from the Northern Virginia Transportation District Fund. I believe that's new as of fiscal year 21. And then we look at the Interstate Operations and Enhancement Program. This is funds that are based on truck vehicle miles, proportional funds that are contributed into the Northern Virginia Fund. And also there's this regional congestion relief fee that is deposited into the Mvta fund that is based on a state portion of state recordation tax that flows into the fund. So those are the monies that flow into the fund. So how are they distributed coming out of the fund? 70% of the Mvta fund stays with the Mvta for regional transportation projects. Those are selected independently by the Mvta itself under a process similar to Smart Scale that ranks and selects projects based primarily on congestion relief. The balance of the fund is redistributed to the localities on a pro rata basis, and the localities themselves control the uses of those the 30% funds. All right, next slide, please. All right, so what are some of the key functions and powers that the MVTA has? Well, the MVTA is unique in that it has a big role in regional transportation planning. It's responsible for the long range transportation plan in the region. It also has a statutory mandate to evaluate all significant projects in Planning District 8. Right, so that makes MVTA itself unique. I won't go through the litany of planning aspects, but you can see the code references there and kind of the key duties that MVTA has to fulfill statutorily. And then it has these two powers, one to issue bonds, issue debt, and that's common among all of the authorities. And it also has a limited tolling authority to impose and collect tolls for new construction or reconstruction that's funded solely with MVTA revenues or in other MVTA controlled sources. So MVTA has I would say the most constrained ability to impose and collect tolls within its boundaries. It has to be projects funded with MVTA controlled or MVTA revenues. Next slide, please. All right, so what are the key interactions between MVTA and the CTB? We've already mentioned the overlapping membership. MVTA also has a duty to consult with CTB and Vdot to avoid duplication of efforts and to combine efforts for project planning purposes. You may wonder what that means, but those are the words pulled straight from the statute, that there's a duty to consult and to avoid duplication of efforts. I'm not perfectly sure how that plays out in reality, but that is a statutory duty of the MVTA. MVTA uniquely has a statutory duty to conduct joint annual public meetings. This particular statute is actually titled Transparency in Project Selection within Planning District 8. It is a unique duty that MVTA has, given that there are sort of so many entities within Northern Virginia that undertake transportation projects. There's a statutory duty for these groups, the MVTA, the CTB, along with NVTC, and the Virginia Railway Express to collaborate and have at least one annual joint public meeting. The MVTA has statutory authority to seek CTB-controlled state or federal funding. It does that. Obviously, there's a big overlap there between CTB and MVTA. And then also, I thought it was worth mentioning the I-66 outside the Beltway concession payment account. This is the concession payment that was paid by private concessionaire associated with I-66 outside the Beltway Hot Lanes project. MVTA has a very meaningful role in project selection under 2018 Memorandum of Agreement with the CTB. And essentially the way that works is the MVTA selects and proposes projects, advances them for CTB approval, and the CTB has a duty to approve and allocate funds as long as the funds are available, and as long as the projects meet the criteria that are agreed within the 2018 Memorandum of Agreement. MVTA also has a statutory authority to interact with Vdot. Vdot can provide these particular services for highway projects. You can see the code reference there. Also, MVTA regularly partners with DRPT on various projects within Northern Virginia. Next slide, please. Okay, so that is MVTA. So then we'll move to the second authority. Is actually a commission that we're talking about today. This is HRTAC, Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission. You can see the composition there. There are more cities and counties, I believe, in this commission than the others. 23 members. very similar makeup to Mvta, at least by analogy. And again, we have one CTB member appointed by the governor, Commissioner of Highways, and Director of DRPT, all overlapping, sitting on both CTB and HR Tech. Next slide, please. All right, so what are HR Tech's revenue sources? HR Tech is unique in this way. It actually controls two statutory funds. The first one, which has been around since I think 2013 or 2014, is the Hampton Roads Transportation Fund. This is sourced through a regional sales tax and a regional fuels tax. It is used to support new construction projects on existing highways, bridges, or tunnels. I think it's new construction or reconstruction projects, but the focus nonetheless for the HRTF is new construction for highways, bridges, and tunnels. A recent fund, as of 2020, a second fund was created that HR TAC also manages. It is the Hampton Roads Regional Transit Fund. There's a dedicated transient occupancy tax revenue that fills this fund. And this fund has a completely different purpose. And the purpose is to maintain, improve, and operate a network of transit routes and related infrastructure within the cities and counties that comprise HR TAC. So two funds, different sources for each, different purposes for each. Beyond that, HR TAC, the Hampton Roads region is unique in this way. In 2020, legislation was passed that expands HR TAC's limited ability to toll, expanded it to include Interstate 64 between Jefferson Avenue, Newport News, and Bowers Hill and Chesapeake. It is a approximately 43-mile planned, approximately 43-mile express lanes network in Hampton Roads along I-64. And so it's actually really interesting when you think about the differences between the way HR TAC is operating in Hampton Roads and the way the Mvta is operating in Northern Virginia. Whereas in Northern Virginia, you have quite a few toll facilities, many of which are done under public-private concession deals. In Hampton Roads, what we're going to have eventually is a Hampton Roads Expresslane network that is funded principally by HR TAC's HRTF fund, and HR TAC itself will be the entity that imposes and collects tolls on that network, receives the toll revenues, actually takes the risk that revenues will be below projections, actually incurs toll-backed debt, and functions similarly to the way that, for example, our private concessionaires function in the Northern Virginia toll facilities, where those entities use their private capital, construct public infrastructure, impose and collect tolls, and take the risk that revenue will be lower than projected. So in Northern Virginia, you have these public-private deals. In Northern Virginia, that region has been excellent in unlocking private capital to build public infrastructure. In Hampton Roads, what we essentially have is a public-public, or what we're going to have is a public-public hot lanes network or express lanes network, where Hampton Roads, our HR TAC itself, is imposing and collecting tolls, receiving toll revenues, incurring toll-back debt, and again, taking the revenue risk associated with that network. All right, next slide, please. All right, so what are the key functions and powers of HR TAC? They control the two funds we already described. They have the authority to issue debt, and we just went through some of their tolling authority. They have sort of what I think of as the original tolling authority, and then this 2020 very targeted tolling authority with respect to the I-64 hot lanes network or express lanes network. I will say that in order to actually use its authority to toll in the I-64 express lanes network, HR TAC was required to enter into a master tolling agreement with, or actually among, HR TAC, CTB, and Vdot. The board may remember that that was done in August of last year. And that master tolling agreement establishes the roles and responsibilities among those three parties. HRTAC principally being the funding partner, Vdot principally being in charge of procuring and administering design and construction of the network itself, and the CTB retaining some limited oversight over the implementation of tolling policies. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so where do HRTAC and CTB interact or overlap? So they have overlapping members, as we've already discussed. HRTAC has a statutory duty to consult with CTB on projects. Of course, HRTAC, like the other entities, can seek CTB-controlled sources of funding through the CTB's selection process. And then we've already kind of talked about this, but the initial and future tolling policies for the Hampton Roads Express Lanes network, HRTAC will have the principal or primary duty for establishing those tolling policies with oversight by the Commissioner of Highways and the CTB under the Master Tolling Agreement. And then HRTAC and Vdot regularly enter into project agreements. HRTAC does massive, regional projects in their region. They've done quite a few, and for each project that is administered, where Vdot procures design and construction services, those are generally done under a form agreement called the Standard Project Agreement, where Vdot again procures design and construction. HRTAC reimburses Vdot, at least for the portion that HRTAC funds of those particular projects. When those standard project agreements are entered into, they're authorized. There's sort of one unique project agreement that's not a standard project agreement, which itself is a massive, complicated project. We have a custom project agreement for funding and administration that is based on the standard project agreement, but has a lot more details just given the complexity of that particular project. Next slide, please. And I should have said that custom project agreement for Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel expansion was obviously awarded by the CTB as well. All right, so then we move to the new entity, the Cvta, created in 2020. You can see its composition. It's comprised of these counties and cities and a town within Central Virginia. 16 members, so less members than the other two. But exactly like the other two, there's one CTB member appointed by the governor, Commissioner of Highways and Director of DRPT, also members. So like the others, 3 overlapping members. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are the Cvta's revenue sources? A lot like HRTAC, there is a dedicated regional sales and fuels tax. They're distributed, according to the bullets here. Only 35% of the revenues are retained for regional projects. 15% are distributed to the Greater Richmond Transit Company. That's the local transit company that runs, I believe, bus routes among the localities in Central Virginia. And then 50%, so half of these revenues are returned to the localities. And you can see here, it can include construction maintenance, sidewalk include construction maintenance. There's a lot of permitted uses here. It's not constrained, for example, the way it is to new construction or reconstruction on new or existing highways, bridges, or tunnels. Next slide, please. All right, so what are going to begin to sound a little repetitive, but so Cvta is charged with developing its own prioritization process for the 35% of the revenues that remain with regional projects. As for the 65% that go to localities and for transit, Cvta has an oversight role where either the localities and also the transit company has to report annually to Cvta on the uses of the funds, and Cvta retains oversight to make sure they were used appropriately. Cvta likewise has the authority to issue debt, and it has limited tolling authority that looks essentially exactly like HRTAC's original tolling authority. They can impose and collect tolls for certain newer improved highways, bridges, or tunnels when CVTA funds have been used. Next slide, please. Okay, where does CVTA interact with CTB? 3 overlapping members. They also have a statutory duty to consult with CTB, slightly different, for projects that encompass a state highway. And then CVTA, in December of last year, the board, CTB, authorized a programmatic memorandum of agreement between the CVTA and Vdot. It establishes the basic roles and responsibilities between those two entities, and it also attaches to that agreement a standard project agreement, which looks a lot like the HR tax standard project agreement. In the event Vdot actually administers design and construction for any of these large regional projects that may be funded by CVTA revenues, the parties would use this standard project agreement, exactly like Vdot does with HR TAC today for the regional projects that Vdot administers on behalf of HR TAC. All right, next slide, please. All right, so again, just to recap, how are they similar? How are these entities similar? They obviously they serve a similar purpose. They fund transportation projects within their geographical regions. Each manages at least one fund with dedicated regional tax revenue source. Each has control over the corresponding funds that are used for regional transportation projects. And of course, they have a similar list of powers. Each has limited tolling authority, HR TAC being the exception that has that targeted I-66 tolling authority. And they all have the ability to issue debt. Obviously, similar membership structures, in each case overlapping with CTB. Next slide, please. This is the slide that I like best because it puts kind of all these entities side by side, and you know, how is each one unique? How do these either are they're established by code or they by function? How are each of these tailored for the needs and desires of the region? Mvta, again, 17 members. It has this long range transportation planning function that the other entities do not have. It has an annual joint meeting requirement. So again, there's because of all the entities that conduct transportation projects in Northern Virginia, there's this transparency requirement in the code. For NVTA, 70% of the revenues remain with the region and go for regional projects, and only 30% are redistributed to the localities. And then we discussed MVTA's unique function, not unilateral function, but unique function in selecting those projects that are funded through the I-66 outside the Beltway concession payment account. HR TAC has the most members, 23. The focus in HR TAC, or the HRTF fund, is on new construction. There is no statutory mandate to redistribute funds to localities. HR TAC's unique in that it oversees 2 funds, not just one, each one with its own dedicated revenue sources and purposes. I'll say it one last time quickly. It has this targeted tolling authority for the Hampton Roads Express Lanes network. And then HR TAC itself, again, will be entitled to receive the toll revenues generated from that network once it's operational. And HR TAC will be responsible for tolling O&M, not roadway O&M, but just only tolling O&M. Lastly, CVTA, 16 members. There is no mandate to prioritize congestion relief. The funds that are dedicated to the CVTA are simply required to go for transportation purposes in the bounds of the CVTA. Half of the revenues go back to the localities under CVTA. Only 35% are retained for regional projects, 15 going to transit. And then it was interesting to me that actions of the CVTA require an affirmative vote of at least 4/5 of the population that votes for CVTA. So that you can see, you know, again, the unique feature here is that half of the money goes back to the localities. The 35% that's retained and used at a regional level requires a pretty high bar for all the localities to agree on the uses of those 35% regional dedicated funds. Next slide, please. All right, we are at the end, so we will take questions if there are any.
Oh, Michael, I am really, really grateful. Thank you. Julie, really excellent overview, I have to say. May I ask you the name of the new person you brought on board for this?
Daniel Bidwell,
So is Daniel on the call with us today?
I believe that he is.
But anyway, Daniel, I just really wanted to welcome you to the team. We work so closely with the Attorney General's office, and just really thank you for your contributions to this as well. So with that, I'm just going to start actually with Allison DeTonk, because, you know, I remember her question so vividly about wanting a presentation like this. So anyway, Allison, I just thought I'd open with you. Any thoughts or comments?
Yes, thank you. And first, Madam Chairman, thank you very much for following up on my questions and requests. I really appreciate it. And Julie and Michael, thank you very much for the presentation. It was very helpful to me. Part of the reason I asked the question, I think maybe at the time, the overriding reason I asked the question about the differences between the authorities was just a general concern I had about the different agreements and different documents that are in place that govern how VDOT administers projects, specifically across districts. And a concern, just a general concern about the differences in the agreements that may impede the effectiveness and efficiencies of VDOT to be able to start and execute projects. And as perhaps authorities continue to grow across the Commonwealth, you know, is that a concern? Is it something we should be watching for?
Well, I think, Michael, you can jump in here, but I think that the purpose of the standard project agreement that was agreed to with at least two of these three authorities is to try to address some of those concerns, to make sure that the agreements do have some consistency, at least within each region. Sounds like you may have a concern about consistency between the regions, but VDOT certainly has made an effort to try to get some consistency within the region.
Michael,
is that helpful? Michael, do you want to answer anything else about that?
Sure, and I'll confess, when it comes to Mvta, I am a novice, but when we talk about HR TAC and the Cvta, you're exactly right, Julie. We have standard project agreements that we use both across the projects with an individual entity, but also when we did the standard project agreement for Central Virginia, we used the contents of the HR TAC standard project agreement as the basis and changed as little as possible, so that we had standard set of terms that apply when VDOT is procuring design and construction services on behalf of one of these regional entities. So there absolutely is a push to keep things uniform among the entities, at least recently, and at least based on what I've worked on. The Mvta projects, I have to say, I'm not as familiar with the agreements under which those are accomplished.
Commissioner Brich, are you with us? I think maybe you could add some perspective to this.
Madam Secretary, what Julie has indicated, as well as Michael, we're striving for consistency across the regions in our application of our duties and responsibilities. So certainly when the latest set of agreements were executed through Cvta, as Michael has indicated, we did use as a benchmark or a foundation the HR TAC agreement that was put into place. There were some tailor making to be able to fit it more towards the Central Virginia region as a whole, but by and large, we've been able to accomplish consistency in our development of those agreements. And if should other regions come about, I would look to make sure that we're consistent in those applications. I'll tell you, that's one thing that we continue to strive across all 9 construction districts, is making sure that not only our external stakeholders we're being consistent with, but also into our own policies and objectives that we have.
Madam Secretary, it's Mary.
Hey, Ms. Hines, I'm just going to finish up with Mr. Tunk. I will just say that your thoughts about consistency in this area are just very well founded. And, you know, this presentation has even made us more aware. We follow the guidance that we have before us, but actually seeing this laid out right now, I think has been really helpful for all of us. Ms. Hines?
Thanks. I did want to add a little bit of information relative to Allison's question too, just about MVTA, because I've been part of it for so long. So the MVTA leadership did work with Vdot very closely to develop this standard project agreements that we use, and they were modeled after the ones that Vdot was already using with localities in the Northern Virginia district. So they weren't created kind of out of whole cloth, and I don't know how they compare to the other two, but I just wanted to say it was a collaboration that created that. But, you know, Allison's question, I think, sort of prompts into like the next level up, which is when I think about my district and the amount of money that MVTA has available, which I know we'll get into next time. You know, over 4 years, MVTA has about as much money as we have in Smart Scale for every 2 years. And so that's a lot of construction, and MVTA's money has to be used for developing new capacity. So that means more lane miles and other kinds of things. And Vdot does do a lot of that. I mean, you know, they are involved deeply in that. And so one of the questions as we think about, you know, with Aubrey, we started on this road of Vdot is more of a construction agency and less of a planning agency. The question is, do we have sufficient capacity? How are we charging for Vdot services? And is that comparable across the regions? And then for me, the sleeper question in all of this is, as we add all this capacity, our maintenance money, which is our, you know, one of our main functions, maintenance money is not increasing at the same rate that construction money is. And so 5 years, 7 years, 10 years from now, the Vdot could be facing this huge backlog or this huge need for maintenance that we have not we've not really thought through. And I think the fact, again, going back to my authority, that we can only spend for new capacity means that MVTA is statutorily forbidden from helping with maintenance at the moment. And I think that that's the sleeper in all of this for the CTB to sort of grapple with as we continue to roll these out. And as we talk to General Assembly members, is we don't want to find ourselves back in the position we were before, where we can't do Smart Scale at all because we have to maintain. So that's kind of my 2 cents. I so appreciate this presentation. It's really helpful. But I think my focus is, you know, 5 years from now, what are the implications of having moved this way as a Commonwealth?
Ms. Hines, I will just say that those are excellent comments. I will say that you are vocalizing, I believe, some of the concerns that we are raising about, you know, taking in the new construction into our system as part of the transportation network. How are we going to manage that going forward? So I really, really appreciate those comments.
Madam Secretary.
Mr. Smoot, good morning.
Good morning to you. If I may, I'd like to ask 2 questions, and either of these can be responded to in the presentation next month, if that's more appropriate. First, Michael, in round numbers, how much debt has been issued by these authorities?
I do not have the numbers on those. I don't know if anybody on you has that in the front of their mind.
John Watson, are you on by any chance?
Yes, Madam Secretary, I am on. I don't have that numbers
okay.
ahead. I know, obviously, HR TAC is the forerunner in this category, and they've issued I want to say around $1 billion in debt, but I don't have that exact number, but it's something we can have for you and bring to the meeting next month.
Yeah, Mr. Smoot, I will just add that that's certainly an issue, you know, that Secretary of Finance, Arby Lane, is very much aware of, and where that debt plays into, you know, what impacts the entire Commonwealth. So anyway, we will get that number for you.
Thank you. And when you talk about this next month, give us some sense of, you know, what the debt holder has to look to for security. I mean, I know there may be some toll revenue, there may be some local government recourse, but you know, what is really backing up this debt? Second question: do these authorities utilize some of their funds from time to time to buy down the costs and thus enhance the competitiveness of projects in smart scale?
The answer would be
Nick
yes for Nova.
Yes. Nick, are you on?
I am, Madam Secretary. I will admit I heard the tail end of Mr. Smoot's question as I was getting off a separate call, so I did not catch the entire question.
Mr. Smoot, will you just restate that?
Surely. The question is, do these authorities utilize some of their funds from time to time to buy down the cost and thus enhance the competitiveness of projects in smart scale?
So, Madam Secretary, Mr. Smoot, to that question, I think what I would say is I think we have seen Hampton Roads has used HR TAC funds on several limited circumstances, most notably the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, where they, you know, are paying several $1 billion for the construction of that project, and they did submit it for smart scale consideration. Again, the amount of funding available statewide in that round was a little less, was I think $850 or so million, and the amount that legally could have been provided to the Hampton Roads District was something on the order of $530 million, and these are round figures I'm doing in my head, so they're accurate but not precise. So in that instance, what I would say, if they had not used their regional funds, the project could not have even been considered in smart scale, because the sheer size of it would have made it ineligible, because we have a requirement in the code that we must fully fund any projects selected through smart scale. And what we see more often is not actually necessarily regional sources, but is local sources being brought to bear as match. And so many jurisdictions in lots of parts of the state do use local money as match for their smart scale projects. And again, the score that we used when developing the staff recommended funding scenario is the requested amount of funding. And so in those circumstances, those local funds do help increase the score of that project. But I would say I think it is more typically local funds that we see rather than regional funds. Now, in fairness, Mr. Smoot, in Northern Virginia, some of the regional funds are distributed back to the local governments, and I'm not sure we're always able to decipher whether that local dollar is a local dollar that came from a property tax, or is a local dollar that was distributed back via the authority to the local governments.
Madam Secretary.
Yes.
Ray, this is Shep. I think HR TAC is John and I think Steve know. They've done about 1.7 billion in debt, and they got another 1.1 that'll come up shortly. So the total debt that comes from them, or that is from them, is $2.8 billion. None of that, it's always been my understanding, none of that is impacts the state's debt rating. It's all backed. It's an independent authority, and it's all backed by a couple sources. One is the HRTF fund that we looked at earlier, and the other is tollback debt that comes off of the Expresslane's network, and including HRBT. So it's a lot of debt, no question about it. But it's always been my understanding, I think I'm accurate, it's not affect the Commonwealth's bond
I
rating
will
or
say,
anything else?
Mil,
9
that
or 9.
that was our initial thinking as well, but it turns out that it does go into our capacity. John Lawson, we may have to come back to you for the full scope of that answer, but are you able to recall the meetings, regarding the capacity of the Commonwealth and how the regional debt does impact us?
Yes, Madam Secretary. Just very briefly, the regions, or at least HR TAC at this point, it is considered a component unit of the Commonwealth. And as a component unit of the Commonwealth, they are reported on the Commonwealth's CAFR. So their debt, while it is not supported by, I'll call it Commonwealth revenues per se, they are supported solely by the HRTF revenues and upcoming toll revenues. They are shown on the Commonwealth's balance sheet, and therefore can have an impact, or could have an impact, I'll say, in how the Commonwealth is viewed and what the total debt issued or outstanding is related to the Commonwealth. That's the concern that Secretary Lane has raised of late.
Yes.
And as we need to make sure the Commonwealth as a whole is really managing its debt capacity.
John and Madam Secretary, my suggestion is that we come back and revisit this in a more meaningful, not more meaningful, but a larger way to understand that. I know there's some disagreement on this point, or has been over time. And frankly, I'd like to know what the real answer is one way or the other. The regional people say no. I know Aubrey's raised, the secretary's raised that question, and I don't know what can or could means. I sort of know what does or doesn't mean in terms of does it impact us or not. So I, for one, would love to see a more robust presentation and get a real answer, or excuse me, not a real answer, final answer to that.
Honestly, if we had, yes, we're very happy to do that. I'm just recalling several months back, and the fact that we are very deliberate about the debt authorizations that we do request. And so we're happy to do that. And so anyway, we'll come back to you all with that information. I think the bottom line is the Commonwealth is going to back up all this debt. We're not going to allow something to default. And I believe that, that also impacts, how it affects all of us. So we will come back. It's something that certainly we consider when seeking debt authorization from the General Assembly. Anybody
Madam
else?
Secretary, this is Carlos.
Hey,
I
Carlos.
actually wanted to supplement Mr. Secretary Donohue's answer to Mr. Smoot. And I guess I'll give you a more practical response, is that the driver for the CVTA was the fact that when we kind of did the back-end analysis, as Deputy Secretary Donohue referred to, jurisdictions were getting a kind of a recirculation of the regional authority dollars to help buy down significant projects, to the point that we had done analysis in the Richmond district that, but for a new revenue source dedicated to regional transportation projects, we would never have the ability to compete effectively for a large project, because the other regions were able to buy down their significant projects enough to, I shouldn't say never, but it would be a long window before we'd be able to compete. So from a pragmatic perspective, absent a regional authority, your ability to get a multi-$100-million project done in your region, such as, for example, something like 64 or major interstate development project, was going to be very limited. The other thing that I will add, and this goes to Ms. Hines' point, is that in the CVTA, the locality's 50% is able to be used for maintenance. So there is greater flexibility. And again, I think the same thing is true for all of these these authorities, these were very, very localized negotiations, with the our legislative delegation to find the right model for the region. So the 50-35-15 was a highly negotiated process in the Richmond district to come up with a model that where everyone felt they could have their priorities addressed, through this new vehicle. And I think the same thing was true with the MVTCA and with Hampton Roads. For example, the fact that their initial dollars could not be used for transit at all was, again, a very, very much localized cultural feature of the leadership in the region and what they thought was appropriate. So just to add that context to that.
Madam Secretary.
Thank you for that. Mr. Smoot.
Carlos, thank you very much. And Mary, I think you raised some very good points a while back that need some further thought too. There is discussion within the Salem district about the desirability and the need to create an authority to help, amongst other things, be more competitive in smart scale. All of the local governments up and down the I-81 corridor, of course, participated in this gasoline tax increase a year or so ago to help fund the 81 improvements, and that's all well and good. But the local governments are now in a position where all of that money is going to a particular project that does not assist in competing in smart scale. So either they're going to have to agree to have another gasoline tax, or they're not going to be able to be as competitive as they would wish to be with those areas of the Commonwealth which do have these additional funds. So I think that's just all a question we need to keep in mind, not resolve today or tomorrow. But,
Yes, Mr. Smoot. And, it's certainly something that's been discussed in the Fredericksburg area previously. And so anyway, many opportunities. And I will say that the Omnibus transportation package, the way that the regional regional fuels tax was implemented into regions that didn't have one, is also going to be a benefit. And I'm not sure how that could be leveraged as well. So anyway, again, many opportunities, really, really great comments. Nick or John, what is the name of the debt advisory group that we have that's within finance?
It's the Debt Capacity Advisory Committee that is part of, it's ran for the treasury.
So anyway, my thought being, it might be really great to have them come and present to us in kind of a broader way. That's what I was just thinking. So, okay, thank you all. With that, and Michael Westerman, again, excellent presentation. I know you have nothing to do. You have nothing going on, so we really appreciate you doing this.
All right, I'm gonna go take a nap.
Yeah. Julie and your team, just such great work. Thank you.
Yes. And Daniel will be interested to hear the next presentation coming up here. We've gotten Daniel pretty busy on some tolling questions lately.
Oh, very good. Very good. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Brich.
Good morning, Madam Secretary.
Good morning.
Can I have the next slide, please? So today's presentation that I'm going to give you a high-level overview on is with regard to the Hampton Roads Expresslane network. I think Michael's presentation preceding this one certainly gave a very good overview of, I think, the Expresslane network as a whole and how this fits into the master tolling agreement that has been executed with HR TAC and HR TAC in general. So as Michael indicated, that in March 14th of 2020, the board did execute the master tolling agreement. And there was a provision in that agreement that requires the Commissioner of Highways to review HR TAC's initial toll policy and to determine whether or not that toll policy will likely have a material adverse effect on the operations and safety of the network as a whole. So the purpose of today's briefing is to be able to provide you an overview of our determination of whether a material adverse effect is being created with regard to the initial toll policy. Next slide. Earlier this year, January 21st to be specific, 2021, the Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission approved the initial toll policy, and that toll policy has been transmitted to you through your board documents earlier or last week. The contents of the initial toll policy are highlighted here, I believe, for you. That are, Nick,
Commissioner, I'm just going to interrupt for 1 second. I just want to remind everyone to please mute if you are not presenting at this time.
My apologies.
Can I just say, for the record, I'm the worst one out of all of you, but there you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, Nick. Those initial toll policies on a high level are indicated here on the slide for you. That the initial toll policy is going to contemplate the initial network that is from Jefferson Avenue all the way to Bowers Hill. The hours of operation are going to be 24/7, 365. We're going to have automated tolling, which is open road tolling. We will not have any toll booths along the facility. Trips are going to be single trip transactions, so that someone that's driving that day is going to experience, if they go from gantry to gantry to gantry, to be able to get one toll rather than a multitude of tolls. So we'll build the trip accordingly. The facility will be dynamically priced based upon the level of traffic density that will be using those facilities, and we will be restricting trucks. Next slide. Next slide. So with regard, as I had indicated, the master tolling agreement requires that the department provide an analysis of how that initial tolling policy and any subsequent tolling policy changes affects the operations of the system as well as the safety. Once we knew last fall that HR TAC was looking at these parameters, our Vdot engineers as well as our consultant team began working in a collaborative manner with HR TAC to initiate the review of the operational segments and the safety. And just as a reminder, that what's contained in the master tolling agreement for determining what a material adverse effect is, it's highlighted there for you. On the operations end, it would have to have a reduction in person throughput greater than 5% for any two sections, or greater than 10% throughput reduction in any one segment. And in my next slide, I'll show you what those segments are. For the safety component, it would have to indicate that the crash rate in any given section or segment would be greater than 5% in a comparison from a before toll rate to a after toll rate. The analysis that we conducted for this initial toll policy is comparing the existing network as we have it there today to the future full build out of the Hampton Roads Expressway network, which is, as I said, all the way from Jefferson Avenue through the Bowers Hill, which constitutes about 45 miles of express lanes in a single direction. By and large, what you saw within your package of the initial toll policy, there are only a number of elements that would be considered germane to an operational analysis or the safety, and those are highlighted here for you. what is the occupancy rate that's associated with the tolling, and it's going to be hot too. We're going to be looking at the tolling operations in a 24/7 environment. Of course, being dynamically priced, we're looking at making sure that the express lanes function at no less than 45 miles an hour per the federal code, and trucks not being in express lanes will have an effect on both operations and safety. So next slide. This figure should come as no surprise to the board. We've been highlighting the effects of the full HREL network over the 45 miles. This highlights the segmentation that was documented within the master tolling agreement into 5 major segments. And by and large, they are system-to-system interchanges that are there. Jefferson Avenue to 664, 664 to 564. The third section or segment is the existing reversible section that's in place today, 564 to 264. 264 to 464, which is being converted, the HOV facility being converted to a hot lane facility now. And then the 5th section being 464 to Bowers Hill, which is the high-rise bridge component. Next slide. So I'm going to start with the end in mind here and really, spoil the outcome. I think this slide sums it up very well. It's a good news story for everyone. That the material adverse effect analysis that the engineers and upon my review has identified is that the overall outcome of the network not only has no decrease in person throughput, actually there's an increase in overall person throughput through the entire network on average by about 22%. Safety, by migrating to this express lane network in the initial tolling policy, we can see that the overall network has a predicted crash rate actually being reduced by a little more than 2% in 2025. And as we've been saying before, that the increase, by having this increased, this 45-mile network, we're able to increase trip reliability. And as we've shown to the board previously, that we're looking for a travel time reduction. If I was to travel from Jefferson Avenue to Bowers Hill or vice versa, that it would reduce travel time on average by about 40 minutes. So by the 3 measures that we've been saying since early part of 2018 has been that the express lane network as a whole is going to be able to move more people safer and provide that reliable trip that just does not exist today. Next slide. So I'm going to advance quickly right into the operational analysis findings for you. Next slide. So for the board, I'd like to highlight a couple items from the methodology that was used by the department to review and determine whether a material adverse effect occurred. We used the same VISIM models that were used previously for the operational analyses that had been previously presented not only to the Commonwealth Transportation Board, but the Hampton Roads Transportation Planning Organization and the HRTAC. We did use, from a consistency standpoint, HRTPO's forecasts and their vehicle occupancy occupancy factors in our models. We analyzed the AM and peak periods for this analysis, and you see that we were testing it against the material adverse effect determinations as stated within the master tolling agreement. By and large, the good news story continues to be, at least in the eastbound direction, that we're on average about 17–18% increases in person throughputs by converting it to an express lane network with these toll policies, and the westbound somewhere in the range north of 30% on average, depending on time period and direction. Next slide. So this is just to be able to give you a high level overview of the segments by AM and PM peak in the eastbound direction and the direct comparison from the build to no build. I'm going to highlight that because we are running a regional model and there may be some changes to employment centers with the build condition, and we do see that there is a potential reduction in the number of person throughput in segment 1 in the PM peak period. There is a slight reduction in that factor, but as the footnote states, we do see an increase in vehicle throughput through that section, albeit in a modest sense. But as you look through these numbers, that I do think that you'll see that we, on the low end, we have about 7% increase in person throughput in some cases. And then, for example, segment 2 in the PM peak period, we see as much as a high of about a 54% increase in person throughput in the direct comparison. So our test in the eastbound direction results in no material adverse effect finding. Next slide. So these results are just in reverse from Bowers Hill to Jefferson Avenue. And as you can see, very similar results that we have, anywhere between 9% increase to overall 52% increase, depending on the section, and no material adverse effect determination based upon our analysis. Next slide. Why don't we keep going on to the next slide? This will be just to highlight the methodology that was used for the safety analysis. Again, we used the HRTPO's regional travel forecast model to be able to generate the average daily traffic volumes. And I should note that the safety analysis is a little bit different than the operational analysis in that we're using a different set of parameters. The operations become less important in the safety analysis. A lot of the safety analysis is based upon the exposure or potential exposure to crashes, which is predominantly driven off of volume or average daily traffic. So the middle part of your slide really highlights the governing factors that would determine whether there's a safety issue or a change in safety. And recall that what we're doing is looking at predicting safety in the no build to the build situation in 2025, which is the opening year of the HRBT. So our crash factors that we're using are ADTs, whether or not we have on ramps or off ramps. Shoulder widths are going to play a vital role in determining a safety impact, and horizontal curvature. And again, the litmus test for whether a material adverse effect is by definition, in accordance with the master tolling agreement, is if a segment has a crash rate greater than 5%. Next slide. So in our summary and our analysis, and I'm going to beat to the punch that there is one segment that has been identified as potentially having a material adverse effect, and by definition, it does from our analysis, which is the 264 to 464 segment. The other four segments do not. In fact, I think you can see that with some of the design features that are being implemented, we anticipate seeing some sizable reductions in crashes along the corridor as a whole. The next two slides, I want to drill down into the 264 to 464 segment that identifies what that is. So what you see, what you saw off the preceding slide was about almost a 10% increase in the crash rate. This is attributable solely to the increase in volume that is going to be anticipated through this section. As you saw at least in the person throughput slide, that this section has about a 30% increase in traffic during the peak periods, and is going to experience a more than about 30,000 vehicles a day increase. through our analysis that we've identified, and it is that the deficiencies caused at the 464 interchange is the contributing factor as to why this interchange or this segment is experiencing the predicted increase in crashes that are associated with it. If you recall from the analysis that we've been providing back to the board as well as the region earlier, we started with 5 hotspot locations when we started the operational analysis in late 2018. Through the evolution of the express lanes and the development of the express lanes and the 2-lane entrances that we've been working through, or the part-time shoulder lanes, we've been able to reduce those 5 hotspot locations and remove 4 of them. The one remaining hotspot location that we said through all of our analysis would be the 464 interchange. We have continued to work with the region as a whole to be able to incorporate interchange alternatives. And the good news is that we have worked with HRTAC and the TPO to be able to address these safety and congestion issues and have that programmed into the constrained long range plan for 2045. Next slide. So this is just a highlight of the 464 interchange and a number, at least in this case, the alternatives that have been identified. We've been working through 4 alternatives, and the slide that you see is alternative 4A in the bottom left-hand corner of your slide. All this does, as you can see, is that it's right now it's a cloverleaf interchange that has a high demand at this location. What we have done, at least in this picture, has created a new ramp from the right-hand side that is a flyover into the center of the interchange. That sole addition in this case, as you can see, and I have 2 heat maps for you. One shows what the anticipated general purpose lanes will look like with our build condition, and this has been highlighted in previous presentations to the board. But with the addition of that single ramp, what we're able to see is the change in the heat map to your right, and this is just a measure of the congestion during the peak period in the PMP. You can see that the addition of that one single ramp eliminates largely the congestion that has been anticipated by the deficiencies at this particular location. And furthermore, at the bottom right-hand corner, we've been able to identify what the predicted travel times along this corridor are going to be. So we're seeing about a net savings of about 13 minutes through this section just by this single ramp and this improvement to the interchange itself. I'd also like to highlight the fact that back in October of this year, we also highlighted that in the 664 corridor improvement program, we did highlight that this was just a continuing issue for the corridor and needing to have this as a part of that ongoing effort to incorporate a change and modification to this location at the 64 or 464 64 interchange location. Next slide. So again, in summary, and you saw this slide earlier, this again, I believe it's a good news story. Overall person throughput increases by 22%. Our reduction in predicted crashes, with the exception of the 464 interchange, but the overall network is going to see a increase in safety. Travel time reliability along the corridor is going to improve. And again, our points that we've been saying since early 2018 is that we're going to move more people safer and more reliable. And so next slide. So my recommendation, based upon the review of the documents submitted to us by my team, the consultant team, and HRTAC, is that my recommendation back to the Commonwealth Transportation Board today, and there will be an action item that we are proposing, is that the Commonwealth Transportation Board approve a finding of no material adverse effect that is caused by the HR TAC tolling policies. As I indicated before, the issues associated with this one section, or segment 4 as we're calling it, the crash rate is due to the network capacity and not impact associated with the toll policy or any of the initial tolling policies. Our findings also, furthermore, based upon the recommendation being presented to you, is that we continue to work with the region in a collaborative manner to ensure that the deficiencies at this location are incorporated into the constrained long-range plan and continue to have funding for this project in the near term. And with that being said, Madam Secretary, members of the board, that concludes my presentation. And if you have any questions for me, I'd be more than happy to answer.
Commissioner, thank you so much. I will simply point out to the board that the presentation you are receiving today is a direct result of so many of you with us today. So I really appreciate the board's input and getting us to this point. Mr. Malbin, is there anything you'd like to add?
Not. Steve did a good job. That 464 is a problem today, and it's only going to get worse as we put more demand through that interchange. And so my hope is that we address that in the near term, because it'll have a huge impact on that whole corridor and what we're trying to accomplish. So.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Johnson, Mr. Miller?
I would just say ditto to Mr. Malbin, agree 100%. And I think it was a great presentation. To be clear, what I heard Steve tell me and what he's told me before is this, the data that suggests there's an issue there. There's an issue there now. Tolling policy has absolutely no impact on it. It continues to be an issue because of the traffic we put through it. And we just got to solve that issue, but it's not a tolling policy issue. So I thank you for that.
Madam Secretary.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes, I agree with both John and Shep. It's not a tolling policy issue. We have a significant issue with that location anyway that I think we're going to be dealing with shortly.
Thank you. Anybody else on the board? Okay, well, again, I just thank everyone for bringing us to this moment, and Commissioner, really excellent presentation. Thank you.
Sure.
The work continues. Okay, let's see. I believe next up is going to be the 2021 Transportation Initiatives. We are going to save the Interstate presentation for April. And today we're going to have, I believe, Mr. Lawson make this presentation.
Yes, Madam Secretary. I'm pitch hitting from Mr.
Congratulations.
Yes, thank you. And I thought I had another presentation to go.
Well, congratulations again. Yes, agile, responsive. That's what we're all working to be, right?
That's it. That's it.
So thank you.
No, thank you. Madam Secretary, members of the board, what I want to run through this morning is just an overview of the 2021 Transportation Initiative, as it's been called, that came out of the budget report this year. Carol, you can go ahead and go to the first slide. The conference report coming out of a regular session, special session, included a number of transportation items within a new item in the budget. It's item 44710, and it's actually labeled the 2021 Transportation Initiative. It directs almost 324 million in one-time funds to transportation initiatives. including the original 55 million that was in the governor's introduced budget of general funds. But it also includes funding from the COVID relief that was passed from Congress in December of 2020. As related to that, and you all recall that, especially those of you that have been on the board for a while, is we typically don't incorporate these types of funds within the Appropriation Act. But what we've done here is that it was COVID relief funds. The General Assembly felt strongly about helping direct the use of those funds, but they also put in here a policy statement that made it clear that normal transportation dollars should continue to be allocated by the board based on the established program. And Carol, go to the next slide. This is the actual language that is in the budget. And this is actually included in the secretary's section of the budget versus in the initiative section. And as you can see, I won't read it to you, but it makes it clear that this is kind of a special, that what we're doing in this item is special, and that it is the intent of the General Assembly that regular funds, I'll call it, would continue to be allocated by the policy and the entity in which would normally be distributing those monies. We felt this was very important, as if we're looking at special funds, you can look at special ways of distributing, but the normal program should continue in the way it was previously prescribed, really as it's set forth in the code. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the initiative does distribute $323.4 million, and it's a combination of one-time federal funds, one-time general funds, and it does include some previous funding balances that had been left uncommitted within transportation. And you see those outlined here. It's about $233 million from federal COVID relief funds, about $55 million related to general funds from state general funds, $20 million from previous balances in the Transportation Partnership Opportunity Fund, or TPOF, as we refer to it, and about $15 million in funds from previous balances out of the access programs. Next slide. This is the list of initiative items that are being provided funding out of these funds, and each of these, as you'll see in the wording, says up to an amount to be provided for each of these. Being in the list here, the Western Rail Initiative, Vre Manassas Line, Interstate 64 corridor, WMATA funding, regional trails, transit equity funding, and then a connected infrastructure demonstration program. And I'll speak to each of these briefly in the upcoming slides. Next. So the Western Rail Initiative, you've heard Nick, Secretary Donohue, Deputy Secretary Donohue, and Director Mitchell both speak about the Western Rail Initiative in the past. What we are looking for here is up to $83.5 million to extend passenger rail from Roanoke into the New River Valley. This would obviously be a tremendous benefit to the 8129 corridor. As part of this, an assessment is being required by November of this year of what it would cost to provide service to Bedford and what an extension of service to Bristol would entail. Next slide. The Vre Manassas Line, again, another big component of rail expansion in the Commonwealth. This would allow DRPT to engage with Norfolk Southern about the potential actions to help improve service in this corridor. This 2021 Transportation Initiative would provide up to $83.5 million to improve the commuter passenger rail service within that corridor. Obviously, if this would be a significant bonus or benefit to that corridor, it would provide additional peak period trains. It could provide additional bi-directional service and weekend service, as we've also looked to do on the 95 corridor. Next slide. The Interstate 64 corridor also is a recipient of these funds. The first thing that we were looking to, the first focus, I'll say, on these funds is to make sure we can fully fund this Hampton Roads Express Lane network that the commissioner just spoke about. In the last financial modeling coming out of HR TAC, they had identified about $93 million shortfall in providing to being able to fully fund that initiative or effort. We do believe that there is additional funding that will be available for this through HR TAC as they finish their traffic and revenue modeling. We were unable to do that fully with COVID underway last summer. If funds are available after finishing the Express Lane network, the remaining funds would be available to support the widening of 64 between Bottoms Bridge and Lightfoot. Next slide. So as I mentioned about the 64 corridor, before the decision would be made on how much funds would be provided out of this 93 million to HR TAC for the Express Lane network, HR TAC is required to complete the traffic revenue modeling. And again, this is really related to weekend travel, which they couldn't do because of the lack of travel last summer. So they will complete that weekend travel and update the financial model and determine what the size, if any, shortfall that may exist. And that work will be done in coordination with the CTB. And again, any available funds would be available for the 64 improvements along the, trying to close the gap between Bottoms Bridge and Lightfoot. And the board is, in this case, will be required to coordinate with the Cvta on opportunities to partner to complete such a work effort. Next slide. Funding for Mvta, as we all know, and as was set up back a few years ago, is really critical. Virginia's share in supporting the $500 million regional commitment is $154 million. And unfortunately, due to reduced revenues, mostly related to the transit occupancy tax, it looks like that this fiscal year 22 will have a shortfall of about $22 million. So out of the $32.4 million that's being provided for Mvta, the first call on those monies is to make whole Virginia's commitment of 154.5. Any monies left over shall be provided to NVTC, Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, to reduce the local contribution that the locals have to support WMATA and helping to reduce the regional gas tax revenues. That everyone obviously has been suffering from the impacts of COVID. So both fuel taxes are down as well, and this will help the local localities in that area. Next slide. Regional trails are another component that were provided funding within the initiative. Within this, there's a total of up to $10 million for the planning, development, and construction of regional trails. Priority is to be given on new trails. And as you can see here, we're really looking for trails that improve the connectivity of existing networks and provide geographic diversity in the use of the funds. In order to distribute these monies, OIP is to establish a work group on regional trails and report to General Assembly by this October. The real focus, again, is identifying new trails and really a master planning process and a funding assessment, needs assessment. Next slide. transit equity is another thing that we've really looked at here and looked at carefully. Up to 10.9 million is to establish pilot programs for fare-free transit and urban and rural transit providers. I know we have done some look at this before, and I think Nick had spoke to this previously. When areas, and Richmond was a big one that did it and provided some free transit when the polls opened. It was significant, like 40%, if I'm recalling the numbers correctly, additional ridership when the free fare was free, I should say, in being able to support the needs of the community. So the purpose of this is to really look at how a pilot could work. The pilots are intended to provide funding on the front end, and then kind of wean itself away over a period of time. Up to 0.9 million of this money is to be used for an equity and modernization study. DRPT will lead that study. The key areas to be considered: transit accessibility, the adequacy of the infrastructure, of course, electrification, new technology, and safety and system engagement. An interim report on this is due this December, with a final report due August of 22. Next slide. Lastly, I believe, is the Connected Infrastructure Demonstration Program. I think Ms. Hines and others may be familiar with this, but up to $10 million here is to be identified, up to 10 million provided for a connected vehicle and infrastructure demonstration project in the city of Falls Church. And this is a partnership with Virginia Tech. It is related to, it is to conduct research on connected and autonomous vehicles. However, there is a stipulation here that the board shall not distribute any monies for this purpose until there's an agreement with Vdot that would facilitate information sharing and knowledge exchange. We want to make sure that we're getting the true benefits or knowledge benefits of the results that come from this pilot program. Next slide. As I mentioned on the onset, there was funding in here that included general funds. So there is $55 million in general funds provided. One of the things that the General Assembly did here is they said that if we do by chance obtain additional COVID relief funds by June 30th of 2021, equal to or greater than that $55 million, then that $55 million would be returned back to the general fund. This stipulation also, though, requires that the $55 million that we would receive would have to have the same eligibility requirements as the funds that we just received through the December COVID relief package. Next slide. So moving forward, we will be eagerly watching what actions, if any, are taken at the reconvened session on April the 7th. We will make sure that we coordinate with the entities that are identified related to each of these initiatives as required by the budget. And then at the April board meeting, we'll be prepared to come back to you and provide additional detail on each item and how they would move forward. With that, Madam Secretary, I'll attempt to answer any questions.
Excellent. You were extremely agile and prepared. So thank you very much for that. Just to put a little bit of this into context, last August, when we first heard from Secretary Lane and the governor about what the financial implications of COVID, what that would mean for transportation dollars, particularly in the early years through FY22. And we were able to work with the governor and the General Assembly during the special session to get the flexibility over this biennium to provide flexibility to you, the Commonwealth Transportation Board, to be able to manage those reductions over this period and over our 6-year improvement window. And so we have been able to do it with a cash management system, putting every dollar to work today. And as a consequence, all the projects remain in our 6-year improvement plan without delay, cancellation, or reduction in workforce. So that was our priority. Where we saw the impacts and where we've been, managing the impacts of the actual reductions has been in the initiatives that we have been undergoing, trying to negotiate and bring to fruition. That's where we have felt the gaps. And so with this COVID relief funds, when we presented the concepts to you at our prior CTB meeting, we were really focused on those initiatives where we could use this funding to fill the gaps caused by COVID. And then working with the General Assembly and having this come out of the conference report, they have built on that. I believe that, many of these initiatives fall within our priorities, and we'll just continue to build and move forward with these projects. And so with that, I will open it up for any comments, thoughts from the board. Well, Mr. Lawson, can I say what an outstanding job you did?
Well, thank you.
Very good. Okay, with that, I will ask Jennifer Mitchell if she has any item she'd like to present this morning.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Just a few updates real quick, primarily related to the transit support that is in the American Recovery Act bill, or as we know, is the Federal Coronavirus Relief Act number 3. Congress did allocate about $30 billion for transit and rail. FTA has not yet released those apportionments for the systems, but we do have information on how much will be going to each of the regions in Virginia. The DC area will be getting about $1.4 billion. And as a reminder, that actually gets split between WMATA, Vre, the Maryland Transit Administration, and some of the local systems as well. The good news is that WMATA has said that they do believe that'll allow them to offset some of the really draconian service cuts they were expecting for FY22, along with some of the layoffs that they were projecting. And so we'll continue to report back on WMATA's progress as they develop their budget with more information there. As far as other systems in Virginia, we expect the Richmond to get about $30 million, Hampton Roads about $56 million, Blacksburg to get about $6 million, Harrisonburg about $5 million, Lynchburg about $4.7 million, and Williamsburg about $3.5 million. And I should say Harrisonburg as well, about $2.7 million. So in addition to that, we expect to receive an apportionment of rural funding of $1.35 million, which we would allocate as well. I know that I think 2 months ago or last month, we reported to you all on the human service funding that was allocated through the previous Recovery Act, which is we were planning to bring back for allocations to you all this month. However, now that we have the additional funding under this latest act, we're going to bring both of those back during the 6-year plan update process for you as well. There is also some additional funds that are going to discretionary programs and intercity bus as well. In addition to that, Amtrak has received a certain amount of funding as well, with $1.7 billion that's going to be Amtrak. Of that, $175 million is available to the states to offset the amounts that we contribute for state-supported service. We don't have any official figures on that yet, but we expect that this Virginia's portion of that is going to be about $12 to $13 million. Amtrak has already announced that it's going to allow them to restore their long-distance services. We expect that all of the long distance service that's been cut in Virginia will be reinstated by June 7th as well. And Amtrak's also announced that it's going to allow them to rehire some of their furloughed employees. They had furloughed about over 1,000 employees, and they expect to be able to hire them next month. So with that, that's a summary of what's in the Recovery Act bill. I do also just want to mention that last week, Secretary Valentine did testify to the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee's Rail Subcommittee as well about rail in Virginia, but supporting some federal funding programs too. And that's the extent of my report. Happy to take questions. Shannon, I think you're on mute.
I always say I never sound better. Any questions for Director Mitchell? I will just add that, you know, having the opportunity to testify, it was March 10th, to the Rail Subcommittee of Transportation and Infrastructure. You know, it was following up on the testimony that I did last year regarding the Long Bridge Act of 2020, the language to go that would allow us to have land conveyed to us from the National Park Service so that we and DC could construct a rail bridge. Literally took an act of Congress. I still think that when that language passed in the Omnibus bill, it was a miracle. December 27th, we were all holding our breath. Regarding this testimony, it was really focused on our Transforming Rail in Virginia initiative and the benefits to the economy, the environment, and equity. And what really struck me about that was Congressman DeFazio's remarkable knowledge of what we were doing here in Virginia. He really laid out the case of what we were doing, many of the unique aspects. So that part was just important and certainly very helpful in providing the testimony. So just wanted to mention that as well. Commissioner Brich.
Madam Secretary, I just have a couple very quick items back to the board. That we've been busy on a number of initiatives that for one reason or another we were not able to bring to them today, but it includes some technology items, including a presentation next month for variable speed limits on 95. We will be bringing to the board an update on the Interstate 81 and funding for that. As the board members should have had some outreach with Carol last week or this week, looking at dates for the upcoming 6-year plan virtual meetings that are out there. Also in April, we'll be bringing to you, I'm hopeful, a video to be able to share with you about the transformation that Virginia has undergone since we've been with the pandemic, recognizing between DRPT and the department, we have not let our foot off the gas pedal or stopped our services back to the Commonwealth citizens. And we want to share with that video with you to be able to highlight the fact that we continue to do our work even during a pandemic and really highlight the things that you would have seen if we were all able to travel throughout the Commonwealth. So that video is getting its final touches on, and we hope to have that ready for April. And I'll say that the final item is in conjunction with that is I'm dubbing 2021 as the year of delivery back to my chief engineer and the 9 district engineers out there, making sure that we continue to have our focus solely on the delivery of our programs, the development of the program, and the delivery of our efforts. And John has highlighted, and I think the secretary has highlighted, all these funding packages that we have. And if there's one thing that does keep me up at night is making sure that we make good on the promises that we have indicated on the use of those monies. So 2021 will be the year of delivery. Madam Secretary.
And there you go. Yes, and I will just assure the board that work continues on many fronts, you know, completing and finalizing the Transforming Rail in Virginia initiative, still pulling together the threads that need to be brought down. I would say it's like having 8 planes in the air and we need to land them all. So that's what we are doing. I did have a really productive, good conversation with Secretary Greg Slater from Maryland about our continued collaboration regarding our commercial, financial, and technical teams with the Capital Beltway Accord, and just moving forward with a number of studies and reports that we need to produce. So much good work taking place, which was really part of why Deputy Secretary Lawson was pitch hitting this morning. May I ask, is Cedric Rucker on the call this morning?
Madam Secretary, he had a conflict, and that's one of the reasons why we deferred one of the presentations.
Okay. Anyway, because people do join at different times. I was just verifying that. We often try, if he's back in school, try to leave some time. What I would like to do is adjourn until 12:15, and Commissioner Rob Carey and Bart Thrasher, I'm wondering if we could have a call at noon. I'll ask Georgia to send a quick invite. So if we could talk at noon, and we'll reconvene and move into our action meeting afterwards. And so, Carol, unless you instruct me differently, I am going to adjourn the workshop, and I will see you all at 12:15 to initiate the action meeting.
That is correct.
Okay, see everybody then. Thank you. Okay.
And we are live.
Thank you, Carol. Welcome back, everybody. And Mr. Tunk, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. In light of the continuing state of emergency declared by Governor Northam, where it is impractical or unsafe to assemble a quorum in a single location, I move that we adopt this agenda to take action to discuss or transact the business statutorily required or necessary to continue the operation of the Commonwealth Transportation Board.
Second.
Any further discussion? Ms. Mathis, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Kasprowitz.
Aye.
Mr. Malbin.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Dr. Smoot.
Aye.
Mr. Stinson.
Aye.
Mr. Yates.
Aye.
Mr. Brown.
Aye.
Mr. Tunk.
Aye.
Mr. Dodson.
Aye.
Ms. Hines.
Aye.
Mr. Johnson.
Aye.
The roll is complete. The motion's passed.
Thank you. Ms. Mathis, do we have any public comment today?
I am told that we currently have 2 people in the queue to address the board.
Okay, are we ready?
We are. Ann Bundy, if you'd like to address the board, please remember to limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Secretary and members of the board. My name is Ann Cundy. I'm the Director of Transportation for the Central Shenandoah Planning District Commission and the Chair of the Virginia Association of MPOs. VAMPO submitted a letter during the public comment period on the development of the VTrans midterm needs prioritization policy. While OIP has addressed our comment regarding the need to better reflect equity in the process, the resolution before the board today does not address the majority of the issues VAMPO raised in its letter dated November 30th, 2020. The multimodal project pipeline and limitation on state study funding to priority 1 locations unduly limits many regions of the state in conducting studies to develop competitive projects for funding programs. The current list of priority 1 locations, statewide and at the district level, plus the project pipeline limitation leaves multiple MPOs with fewer than 5 locations eligible for studies. Many of these locations are intersections or very short roadway segments. Most Priority 1 locations have been studied, are being studied now, or will soon be addressed by a programmed project in the 6-year improvement plan. This could be remedied with a text change to the first resolution on page 4 of the document. Instead of stating that state study funding shall be limited to Priority 1 locations, we suggest that the pipeline shall first consider addressing Priority 1 locations and subsequently address lower priority locations. This expanded eligibility is critical if the list of prioritized needs will not be updated again until we begin VTrans 2050. Thank you for your consideration of our suggestions this afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you so much for bringing this to our attention and for making time to be with us today.
Thanks.
Okay, who's next?
It's excuse me, Mr. Jeff Allen, if you would like to address the board, now is the opportunity to do that.
Hello?
I see he's connected, but I'm not getting a response from him.
I'm sorry, I had my phone on mute to respect the prior speaker. Madam
Nice
Chair, I'm
that
Jeff
happens
Allen.
to many of us. Welcome.
Yes, as you said, I do some of my best talking on mute. Madam Chair, CTB members and friends, I'm delighted to virtually join you today. Recent good news from Washington indicates that President Biden is considering federally funding a new transportation infrastructure bill to assist the states with aging and worn out transportation infrastructure throughout America. I know that this board has long exhibited concern for replacement funding for the Norris Bridge and Virginia's Northern Neck. And it is with this long-standing concern that I, as now a comfortably retired Virginia citizen, rise this afternoon to invoke your ongoing efforts to seek federal funding for a long overdue replacement of the 1957 Norris Bridge, comprised of two lanes, each approximately 10 feet in width. The Norris Bridge spans the 2-mile-wide Rappahannock River crossing from Topping, Virginia and Middlesex County to Whitestone, Virginia and Lancaster County as part of State Route 3. It is one of only 2 bridges that provides highway access to the Northern Neck. The other bridge is the relatively newer 4-lane State Route 360 bridge from Tappahannock to Warsaw, Virginia. Prior to the Norris Bridge crossing of the Rappahannock at Whitestone, there was no highway bridge, and crossing the 2-mile section of the Rappahannock was done only by ferry. Since August 30th, 1957, the bridge has become Virginia's singular highway to the lower Northern Neck and serves not only a large rural farming, waterman, and tourist business, but more recently a rapidly building retirement, second home, and relocating virtual workforce from throughout Virginia and the eastern United States. Bridge traffic has steadily increased, and with the older design, age, and traffic, so have safety concerns. As some of you know, in addition to serving Virginia and its citizens, I had the pleasure and honor to serve with and support America's fighter pilots. Over those years, flying in formation was a skill I learned was handled by 2 types of pilots. One who loved to do it and thought nothing of it, and the other rightfully terrified of it. Crossing the existing Norris Bridge, 110 feet in the air, with 60-foot water depths below, at 45 miles per hour, with 2 10-foot lanes while confronting multiple tractor trailers coming from the opposite 2 miles presents somewhat the same phenomena. Some drivers are capable of doing it with impunity and some rightfully are not. While luckily I fall into the former category, I understand and certainly more than appreciate the safety concerns associated with crossing this 2-mile bridge over the Rappahannock River. My point, though, is that simply driving across any bridge on a Virginia highway ought not to be comparable to high-risk fighter pilots flying in formation. To allow you to appreciate the necessity and gravamen of providing a safer, more modern, viable bridge crossing, we would like to again offer up our Northern Neck location for a remote meeting site as the pandemic subsides and the CTB is once again able to venture back to visiting important Virginia transportation sites. We had prepared to host a meeting with you prior to the pandemic and were unable to do so. Now we wish to again follow up with the board. Finally, let me conclude by requesting your continued support. There have been indications that President Biden may request from the states a list of projects to replace aging transportation infrastructure across America. Certainly, we hope you agree that the Norris Bridge should be on that list, and if funding can be had for that purpose, the Norris Bridge should be a benefactor of that funding in Virginia within the earliest possible time frame. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon.
Well, when I heard Jeff Allen, I did not realize that was our Jeff Allen. And for those of you on this board, Jeff Allen was our representative from the Attorney General's office for many, many years. So I thank you. I thank you for your consistency and your passion on this issue, and we certainly do take it to heart. I will say that the passage of the governor's omnibus transportation package in 2020, which established within it the Special Structures Fund, which the fund will be fully implemented by 2024, although we're still trying to manage with the actual funding, how that will be phased in. But I do believe that the commitment we've made in the Commonwealth puts us in a very solid position to apply for federal funding on this. So I'm hoping that many things converge and go hand in hand, and special structures and certainly this bridge have been with us for a very, very long time. So thank you for sharing that. And I remember trying to coordinate the meeting over in your region. And so hopefully we will be able to move forward with those opportunities not too far away. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Jeff.
Okay, anybody else?
That concludes the public caller queue.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Hofrichter, you're up.
Madam Secretary, we need to approve the minutes.
Oh, yes. I was very excited for your presentation, Mr. Hofrichter. Do I have a motion on the minutes?
Moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor or opposition, please indicate in the roll.
Dr. Smoot.
Aye.
Mr. Stinson.
Aye.
Mr. Yates.
Aye.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Ms. Tunk.
Yes.
Mr. Dodson.
Whoa, yes.
Ms. Hines.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson. Mr. Kasprowitz.
Aye.
Mr. Malbin.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
The roll's complete. The motion's passed.
Thank you. Mr. Hofrichter.
And good afternoon, Secretary Valentine and members of the board.
Good afternoon.
I have
have before you a request to discontinue 3/10 of a mile of Route 630 in Tazewell County, located in the Bristol District. This is a disused portion of roadway. The reason we're asking for a discontinuance in this case is that it does have two low crossings of a stream and rail crossing. So we don't want to prohibit the public from exercising the ability to do that. But currently it is not used, so it doesn't warrant public expense at maintaining it. The Tazewell County Board has passed a resolution in support of this action. The item was advertised. We received no requests and no comments.
Mr. Stevenson.
Madam Secretary, I make a motion to support discontinuance.
Second.
Any further discussion? Please indicate your approval or opposition in the roll.
Mr. Johnson,
Aye.
Mr. Kasprowitz,
Aye.
Aye.
Mr. Malbin,
Aye.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Dr. Smoot,
Aye.
Mr. Stinson,
Aye.
Mr. Yates,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Tunk,
Yes.
Mr. Dodson,
Yes.
Ms. Hines.
Yes.
The roll is complete. The motion's passed.
Thank you, Ms. Pryor. And my intention is to take this all in a block vote unless there is any opposition.
Okay,
Ms.
good
Pryor.
afternoon, Madam Secretary, members of the board. I have 5 items for you today. The first is the amendment of 5 projects to the 6-year improvement program. 4 of them are locally funded. 1 is a systemic safety project. They are all in Fredericksburg District. The second item I have for your consideration is my normal monthly transfers. The 4th item is the cancellation of a smart scale project. It is the Route 106-105 roundabout in Charles City County in Richmond District. I briefed the board on this cancellation last month. The next item is the cancellation of a smart scale project in Greensville County in Hampton Roads District. It is the Route 301 South Median crossover, and I also briefed the board on this proposed cancellation last month. Finally, a 3rd smart scale project cancellation of the Backlick Run multi-use trail in the city of Alexandria in Northern Virginia District. This was also briefed to the board last month, and I recommend your approval for all of these items.
Do I have a motion?
So
I
moved.
move approval. Second.
Any further discussion? Please indicate your approval or opposition in the roll.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Tunk,
Yes.
Mr. Dodson,
Yes.
Ms. Hines,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Kasprowitz,
Yes.
Mr. Malbin,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Dr. Smoot,
Aye.
Mr. Stinson,
Aye.
Mr. Yates.
Yes.
The roll is complete. The motions have passed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Keen.
Yes, good afternoon, Madam Secretary and members of the board. I only have 1 action item for your consideration today. It's a limited access control change on State Route 460 at Peppers Ferry Road in the town of Christiansburg. Modification of the limited access is a result of a locally administered intersection improvement project that requires the widening of Arbor Drive at the intersection with Peppers Ferry in the area of the interchange. The town posted a notice of willingness for public comment in fall of 2020, and those notices expired with no comments or other input from the public. The Christiansburg Town Council also endorsed the changes to the limited access control by resolution dated December 8th, 2020. Because this is on State Route 460, FHWA approval is not required. The total estimated cost of the project is $1.8 million, and I recommend and request your approval of the change in limited access.
Mr. Smoot.
Madam Secretary, I move approval. This project will significantly improve both safety and the flow of traffic at this location.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those, please indicate your concurrence with the roll.
Mr. Malbin,
I concur.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Dr. Smoot,
Aye.
Mr. Stinson,
Aye.
Mr. Yates, Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Tunk,
Yes.
Mr. Dodson,
Yes.
Ms. Hines,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Aye.
Mr. Kasprowitz.
Yes.
The roll is complete. The motion is passed.
Thank you. Mr. Dudley.
Good afternoon, Madam Secretary, members of the board. Today I have 4 items for your consideration.
And may I say that I am intending to take these as a block vote unless I hear opposition.
Yes, ma'am. The first item is a request to transfer surplus revenue sharing allocations to a non-revenue sharing project in Fairfax County. According to board policy and revenue sharing guidelines, any transfer of surplus revenue sharing allocations to a non-revenue sharing project must be approved by the full board and go to a project that is in deficit and requires the funding to go to advertisement or award within 12 months. For this action, the County of Fairfax has requested by resolution that surpluses from 2 completed revenue sharing projects be reallocated to the Springfield Commuter Parking Garage project. The total transfer is $2,018,942 in state allocations, and the transfer will allow the project award to occur. I believe that is later this month. We have reviewed the request and recommend approval. The second item is another request to transfer surplus revenue sharing allocations to a non-revenue sharing project in the city of Roanoke. For this item, the city of Roanoke has requested that surplus allocations from a revenue sharing project, that's 10th Street improvements, be reallocated to the 13th Street improvements project. The total transfer is $450,619 in state allocations. The Local Assistance Division has reviewed the request and also recommends its approval. Our next 2 items are economic development access allocations. The first is a request from Pulaski County for allocations to support the construction of an access road for Patton Logistics, which plans to construct a 251,000 square foot facility for the purposes of providing warehousing and logistical services within the New River Valley Commerce Park. For your information, Patton Logistics is a cargo and freight company and apparently is one of FedEx's largest contractors. The Patton Logistics facility is expected to result in an investment of $12 million and add up to 33 new jobs. The road plans call for a 20-foot wide asphalt roadway, approximately 900 feet in length. The Vdot Salem district concurs with the plans for the project and with the estimated project cost of $411,000. The county is requesting $411,000 economic development access allocations and will be responsible for documenting $2,055,000 of qualifying capital investment before funding authorization. The final allocation request comes from the city of Portsmouth, and they are requesting the maximum allocation of $650,000 to support the construction of an access road for Preferred Freezer Services, which plans to construct a 200,000 square foot facility for the purposes of importing, exporting, and distributing food products off West Norfolk Road. The preferred freezer services facility is expected to result in a $60 million investment and will add up to 60 new jobs. The city of Portsmouth will administer the design and construction of the project. The project will be approximately 500 feet in length and 32 feet wide, and the total cost is $1,503,000, which of course is above the priority funding authorization. We have reviewed the request and recommend approval. Any questions?
Madam Secretary, this project is supported by the VEDP. I know it's exceeds the maximum, but it also qualifies for the EDA program funds, and Portsmouth can certainly use this type of economic development opportunity. So I support it and make a motion to approve.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, please indicate your approval or opposition in the roll.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Dr. Smoot.
Aye.
Mr. Stinson.
Aye.
Mr. Yates.
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Ms. DeTunk.
Yes.
Mr. Dodson.
Yes.
Ms. Hines.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Aye.
Mr. Kasprowitz.
Aye.
Mr. Malbin.
Aye.
The roll is complete. The motions have passed.
Madam Secretary, I have a question for you or a comment.
Yes.
It's Greg.
Oh, hello. I haven't spoken to you yet.
How are you?
I am well, thank you.
Good. Good.
Welcome.
I've had some extensive conversations and emails with Mr. Dudley concerning the revenue sharing program, and I just want to share a few of those with the board because there may be something coming up next month. With COVID and the change in the budget planning and the budget amounts earlier this year, as you know, many items were cut way back as far as funding goes and amounts of funding. So revenue sharing, I think a lot of the programs were pushed off 2 or 3 years because of anticipation of lack of funding due to COVID. Well, recently, I think everybody's aware of the fact that the budget numbers are coming in much better than they were originally. Revenues seem to be better than we thought. And so I've had localities, especially rural areas, ask about bringing back the revenue sharing programs a little quicker than they were pushed off. And I think they were pushed off very conservatively quite far into the future because of COVID. So I've asked Mr. Dudley to look at that and see if we can't either find some of these projects that were not funded yet, or else find out whether there's enough money to come back in the budget to bring them in a little more timely manner. Because many of these rural areas rely on those programs, and of course, anything with revenue sharing is good for us, I think. So just wanted to make a comment on that and let you know, Mr. Dudley.
And Ms. Pryor, I want to make sure you don't leave, but you know, I think it's really important to know that no projects were cut and everything is on schedule that had been submitted into the program. So we only use funding that was not required according to their own schedule. So nothing was cut. There is a delay in the next round, the application round, to put it in line with Smart Scale. So that was the only thing that was delayed. And so, Ms. Pryor, I just want to make sure that you confirm that.
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. The commitment was that the projects where we released previous allocations and replaced them in fiscal years 21 and 24, those allocations were reallocated to support the existing project schedules. And as you said, the most recently selected revenue sharing allocations that we added to the FY21 COVID update are in FY25 and 26.
So, you know, but your point though, Mr. Yates, to see if the application cycle could be amended, is certainly one that, we are happy to look at. I just wanted to make sure as this is being.
Understand that. I just know that the longer the projects are pushed out, the inflation factor comes into effect and they could cost a lot more money. So especially when you're planning with today's dollars. So I appreciate everybody looking at that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Madam Secretary, this is Russ. Could I provide a bit of information?
Yes, yes.
So we are looking at projects that possibly a mid-year deallocation cycle. I think there may be enough surpluses out there that we can support some of these projects that are asking for a little more money. So we're looking into that to see how much there is out there so that we can support these projects. So it's complicated, but we'll bring something to the board here very soon.
And probably to the commissioner first.
Oh, absolutely. We'll probably go to Rick first.
I was waiting for the commissioner to say yes.
Absolutely. It'll probably go to Rick first, and then it'll go to the commissioner.
Yes.
Absolutely.
But all good work. I just, as one who receives many comments on our work, I just was trying to make sure we all understood the request. So thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
all. Okay. Let's see. Is it Chris Hall up next? I'm kind of.
Yes, we're on item number 12.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Welcome.
All right, good afternoon, Madam Secretary, members of the board. I'm requesting the board's approval of a resolution authorizing the commissioner to enter into an amendment of the standard project agreement between the Virginia Department of Transportation and the Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission for the expanded Bowers Hill Interchange study. This amendment adds $3.9 million of HR TAC funding to the current Bowers Hill study, and the board was provided a Bowers Hill study update at the last monthly workshop. That's all I have, Madam Secretary.
Mr. Malbin.
I make a motion we approve.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Secretary,
Please.
this is
It's
Mary.
fine.
I have a quick question, and I apologize if my memory is faulty. I appreciate the curing of the issue that was raised by the CTB earlier. Was that a flaw in all of the standard project agreements? And so it'll be fixed moving forward. I just clarity about what the cure actually applies to. You're looking at me like you have no idea what I'm talking about. Do I need to be more?
Yeah, I am not sure.
That'd be
Commissioner?
correct.
Secretary, I'm not sure that the cure provision that had been put into the other agreements for the Expresslane projects has been inserted. I am not sure whether the cure has been inserted into the standard project agreement now with HR TAC on all subsequent ones. We'll certainly make we'll review this particular agreement before it's executed, and if it is not in there, we will go back to HR TAC to make sure the cure language is in there, and then subsequently update the standard project agreement.
So Ms. Hines, really, I was thinking, okay, I don't know the answer to this question. I was thinking who would know the answer. So Commissioner, thank you for being there. So any further discussion? Okay, please indicate your approval or opposition in the roll.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Mr. Tunk.
Yes.
Mr. Dodson.
Yes.
Ms. Hines.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Kasperlitz.
Yes.
Mr. Malbin.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Dr. Smoot.
Yes.
Mr. Stinson.
Yes.
Mr. Yates.
Yes.
The roll is complete. The motion is passed.
Thank you. Mr. Latimer.
Good afternoon, Madam Secretary and members of the board. I have a resolution for Tucker Timber Products in Keysville, Virginia. This is a rail industrial access application. They have applied for $422,000, $678. 40 employees will be supported, addition of 2 employees. They scored 53 points. The applicant plans to run 201 rail cars annually. They will be required to provide a 30% match, and staff does recommend approval.
Mr. Dodson.
Yes, Madam Secretary, I think we spoke about this obviously last meeting and a couple meetings before that, and I move the resolution as presented. Thank you for your consideration.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? I will just say, Director Mitchell, Jeremy Latimer, Mr. Dodson, that was a really well done presentation. And I do believe that Chad Tucker is still looking for a hat.
I've already secured that, Madam Secretary. When I see
Okay,
Mr.
there you
Mr.
go.
Tucker. Okay. I've already secured.
Agile, responsive, just taking note, everybody. Any further discussion? Okay, please indicate your approval or opposition in the roll.
Mr. Yates,
Yes.
Mr. Stinson,
Yes.
Dr. Smoot,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Malvin,
Yes.
Mr. Kasperwitz,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Hines,
Yes.
Mr. Dodson,
Gladly, yes.
Ms. Tunk,
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
The roll is complete. The motion is passed.
Thank you, Ms. Mathis. So I'm not sure if it's going to be Deputy Secretary Donohue or Deputy Director Day.
I'm here.
Okay, you're up then. Congratulations.
Good afternoon, Madam Secretary and members of the board. It's good to see you. So what's before you today is a resolution requesting action to approve the prioritization of the VTrans midterm needs. In January, Jitendra Ramchandani came to the board and walked you through how we developed that prioritization. And last month, Deputy Secretary Nick Donohue shared with you all the steps that we are taking to establish the multimodal project pipeline. Our immediate next steps is to continue working on the project pipeline, and in the coming months, you all can expect to hear from us. We will continue that dialogue. And then we'll also be coming back to discuss strategic actions to include vulnerability and trends, our freight, et cetera. So I did want to at least, share with you all that there is more to come on that. I'd also like to take the time to address Ms. Cundy's comments regarding the priority 1 locations. As you all are aware, we have a number of needs across the state, and those priority 1 locations are really what we've identified as our most critical, where we have multiple very high needs that are there, whether it's congestion or safety or reliability issues. We do have needs that are identified both in statewide and the district, albeit it is a small, a small subset. We are working to continue to develop the project pipeline to identify what the studies are that we are going to suggest moving forward, and also working with the board on that. There was a comment made regarding programmed projects. We do recognize that that is an issue that we are working on with the Vdot team and TMPD, and identifying where those projects are that are already programmed, and also where we've already completed studies, because obviously if you've already done work on them, we don't want those included in the locations that we're considering for study with our project pipeline. So I did also want to share that, and also take the moment to thank Jitendra and his team for all of the work that's been done to pull this together. And with that, I do recommend your approval.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Second. Any further discussion?
Madam Chair, just to add to what Ms. Day reported, if the motion allows for CTB members to have a study that's not related to a priority one area, if I recall correctly. I read it late this weekend. So I think I would encourage everybody just to make sure they're reaching out and having an opportunity to exercise that authority to designate another study that's a non-priority one if need be. Thank
Yes. Bronique, is there anything you would like to add to that?
No, but that is absolutely correct. The board does have that availability to make those decisions. And as we move forward, the project pipeline and how we're developing it, there may be some changes. There's more to come. I don't want to say in the early stages because we have been talking about this for a few months now, but we are definitely actively moving this forward. And so we do look forward to working with each of you as we further develop that pipeline.
I will just add that, the comments from Ms. Cundy this morning or this afternoon, are very important. We take this seriously. It is ongoing.
Yes.
So I did want to make that point as well. We are listening, and I believe this is an issue the equity issue is one that's just so important. And so we are just continuing to build that into our planning process. So any additional comments?
Madam Secretary.
Mr. Smoot.
Ronique, I just want to also lift that up as a concern. I've gotten some feedback on it from localities in the Salem district, and I like what I heard said today. And as long as we keep this in mind into the process going forward, I think it should work fine.
Okay. I see Ms. Day shaking her head. Yes. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Smoot. Anybody else? Well, quite frankly, it's important to me. I will say that I've made my concerns, I've made them very clear as well. So I join with all of you in that.
Yes.
Okay. Any additional comments? Okay. Please indicate your approval or opposition in the roll.
Mr. Johnson,
Aye.
Mr. Kasperlitz,
Aye.
Mr. Malbin,
Aye.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Dr. Smoot,
Aye.
Mr. Stinson,
Aye.
Mr. Yates,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Tunk,
Yes.
Mr. Dodson,
Yes.
Ms. Hines.
Yes.
The roll is complete. The motion is passed.
Thank you, Ms. Mathis. Here we go. Mr. Caples.
Madam Secretary, you got one other one.
Oh, Commissioner Brich.
I know.
How did I miss this?
I don't know.
I hope you appreciated my comments to Mr. Dudley.
I absolutely did. He was going to get a phone call anyway, so.
Anyway,
time.
so funny. All right, welcome.
Madam Secretary, before I get into my one item, I'd like to just go back to item 12 that Ms. Hines brought up with regard to the cure provision in the standard project agreement for that. Item 12, it's been verified through Joanne and Chris Hall that the standard project agreement that is going to be executed does have the cure provision incorporated. So it's already been incorporated and we're good to go. With that being said, we'll go to item 15. I have one item for your consideration today, and that is the action relating to the initial toll policy or initial tolling policies of the Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission for the Hampton Roads Expresslane network that is consistent with the master tolling agreement. As indicated and as I presented earlier today, in accordance with the master tolling agreement that was executed in August of 2020, I have reviewed the initial tolling policy and the professional engineering review of its effects on the safety and operations of the network. I have determined that the initial toll policy does not have a material adverse effect on safety or operations of the network. And therefore, I am recommending to the Commonwealth Transportation Board to take a no adverse effect determination. What you have before you is a resolution that would direct the commissioner to issue a no exception notice that is in accordance with the agreement or the master tolling agreement. And I recommend your approval.
I make a motion, we approve.
Second.
Any further discussion? Please indicate your approval or opposition in the roll.
Mr. Kasprowitz,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Ms. Hines,
Yes.
Mr. Dodson,
Yes.
Ms. Tunk,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Malvin,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Dr. Smoot,
Yes.
Mr. Stinson, Mr. Yates.
Yes.
The roll is complete. The motion is passed.
Thank you. Mr. Caples,
Madam Secretary, members of the board, how are y'all this afternoon?
I am well.
That's
The
good.
board is
I have trying to get through this. I have 4 items for the board's consideration today. The first project is order number D48. This is the Northern Virginia District project. It's the Interstate Auxiliary Lane addition in Prince William County. We had 4 bidders on this project. The low bid was within the range of the evaluative estimate. It was below the design estimate, as everyone can see here. After conducting our bid analysis, we find that the bid represents both market value and a good value for the Commonwealth, and we recommend for an award to Corman Kokosin Construction out of Annapolis Junction, Maryland.
Madam Secretary, I move approval.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Please indicate your approval or opposition in the roll.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Tunk,
Yes.
Mr. Dodson,
Yes.
Ms. Hines,
Yes.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Kasprowitz,
Yes.
Mr. Malvin,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Dr. Smoot,
Yes.
Mr. Stinson, Mr. Yates.
Yes.
The roll is complete. The motion's passed.
Mr. Caples.
Our next project is order number D54. This is a Richmond District project for superstructure replacement on Interstate 95 over Raymond Road. We had 4 bidders on this project. The low bid was within the range of the evaluative estimate. After conducting our analysis, we find that the bid represents both market value as well as good value, and we recommend award to Archer Western Construction out of Herndon, Virginia.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor or opposition, please indicate in the roll.
Mr. Yates,
Yes.
Mr. Stinson, Dr. Smoot,
Aye.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Mr. Malvin,
Aye.
Mr. Kasprowitz,
Aye.
Mr. Johnson,
Aye.
Ms. Hines,
Aye.
Mr. Dodson,
Yes.
Mr. Tunk,
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
The roll is complete. The motion's passed.
Thank you.
The next project is order number 467. This is a Richmond District schedule work project. It's a plant mix contract for paving in Richmond District. We had 4 bidders on this project. Low bid was within the range of the evaluative estimate. And after conducting our analysis, we find that it represents both market value as well as good value, and recommend award to Allen Myers, Virginia, Inc., out of Glen Allen, Virginia.
Mr. Brown?
So moved. And I did have one question, Madam Secretary. I know that Mr. Capsowitz had raised this before. So we're seeing more bidders participate in these competitions. Is there something driving why we're now seeing more versus in the past where we'd only have 1 or 2 participate?
On this particular project that we're looking at right now, Richmond District, when it comes to plant mix, we typically have a very competitive market, anywhere from 3 to 6 bidders sometimes. In the Richmond District, there are areas in the state that we see limited competition with 1 or 2 bidders at times. But holistically, we are in the pandemic times, since last March, April timeframe, when kind of the pandemic really hit, we have seen an increased level of competition from contractors, both in the state as well as new contractors from out of state.
Great. So moved, Madam Chair.
Second.
Any further discussion? Please indicate your approval or opposition in the roll.
Dr. Smoot.
Aye.
Mr. Stinson.
Yes.
Mr. Yates.
Yes.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Mr. Tunk.
Yes.
Mr. Dodson.
Yes.
Ms. Hines.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Kasprowitz.
Yes.
Mr. Malvin.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
The roll is complete. The motion's passed.
Thank you.
And that brings up the final project for your consideration today. This is order number 350. This is out of another scheduled project, plant mix contract out of Lynchburg District. We had 2 bidders on this project. The low bid did slightly exceed the range of the evaluative estimate. However, after conducting our analysis, we find that it represents both market value and a good value for the Commonwealth, and recommend award to APAC Atlantic, Inc. out of Greensboro, North Carolina.
Mr. Dodson?
Yes, ma'am. I would move. Yes, ma'am. I would move the resolution. Approval.
Second.
Any further discussion?
Yes, ma'am. Madam Secretary, I will say I talked to Chris Winstead, our engineer here locally, and we do have the issue in some areas. This is on the Pennsylvania County, I believe, which is on the North Carolina border, of getting more people to bid on the work. I'm glad it's under the estimated construction costs. Thank you.
Thank you. Good perspective. Any other comments? Please indicate your approval or opposition in the roll.
Mr. Brown.
Yes.
Mr. Tunk.
Yes.
Mr. Dodson.
Yes.
Ms. Hines. Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Kasprowitz. Mr. Malvin.
Yes, I'm proud of Mr. Caples. I thought the last one was gonna be over budget, take away the value of the first 3. Good job.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Dr. Smoot.
Yes.
Mr. Stinson.
Yes.
Mr. Yates.
Yes.
The roll's complete. The motion's passed.
Mr. Caples, thank you.
Thank you, Secretary.
So any new business from the board? I will just say that I'm just going to ask that nobody tell Georgia that we're ending this meeting at 1:09 in the afternoon.
Good one.
I'm going to tell her that we're still talking.
Excellent job, Madam Secretary.
Very,
Madam Secretary, I was going to ask, when is the next meeting scheduled? Is it 21st
yes.
or 22nd?
Well, right now we have both days reserved. And when the schedule was set, we didn't know quite where the vaccine rollout was going to be. I feel confident we're going to have a virtual meeting. And I'll discuss with the Commissioner and Director Mitchell which day, and we'll try to get it to you by the end of this week. But for now, I know you have both days saved. I just want to confirm with everybody's schedule, but it will be a virtual meeting. As some of us still don't have a vaccine, but I'm really hoping we're all moving in the direction of getting one.
Hey, Madam Secretary, I just have one comment. I thought that presentation on our tolling authorities, the authorities throughout the state was very well done. Well, one little confusion I had in terms when we got to the debt of HR tax, that I kind of thought that debt was revenue bonds, and it was based on revenue modeling and investment grade TNR studies. And I thought that's what kind of dictated the bonding capacity and possibly the rate. I wasn't aware that the state was still standing behind that debt. I thought we were standing alone on that debt. So maybe next month we can get that clarified for my sake anyway.
Yes. And and again, the way John, we weren't prepared actually to address it today, for this coming up. It is a component, and it was something that we all learned as well. And I'll be happy to check on Aubrey's schedule or the advisory council schedule to see, when we can have that presentation. But again, that is something that we've learned. And so, yes, we're very happy to share this with you.
Thank you.
Yes, yes. And so with that, happy St. Patrick's Day, everybody. So anyway, folklore has it that I was actually conceived in Shannon, Ireland. And so there you go. But anyway, just wishing you all the best. And I really wish all meetings could be run like this. So thank you again. And we'll be back in touch soon.
Yep.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Have a great day. Thanks.